Good morning, everyone, and I am so pleased to welcome you to this governing board meeting here in Placer County, California. And I really appreciate staff and all the effort it takes to come rotate these meetings, but what a great opportunity for our North Shore residents. The date is Wednesday, August 23rd, 2023. It is now 10:47 a.m. The first item on the agenda is the roll call. How are we going to handle? Oh, there's Maria. Their microphones are not working. So those of you in the room will see that they are having to jump up and down to do these roll calls. So thank you, Maria. We'll get your steps in today.
Yep. Ms. Aldine.
Here.
Mr. Aguilar. Ms. Conrad Seda.
Here.
Ms. Dis.
Here.
Ms. Faustinos.
Here.
Mr. Friedrich.
Here.
Ms. Gustafson.
Here.
Ms. Hayes. Ms. Hill.
Here.
Mr. Honigman.
Here.
Ms. Lane.
Here.
Mr. Rice.
Here.
Mr. Settlemeyer.
Here.
Ms. Williamson.
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. So first off, I'm going to go through the remote and in-person meeting rules for the day. For the members of the public who are joining us remotely, to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov. Under the calendar header, click on Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for August 23rd, 2023. There you'll find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom today. To address board members directly with your comments, please raise your hand in Zoom by clicking Raise Hand at the bottom of your screen at the appropriate agenda item. And with your hand raised, you will be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the board. If you have used the dial-in numbers to join us by telephone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. To remote board members, if you wish to speak, please also raise your hand in Zoom. You will find the hand icon on the bottom of your screen. And remote board members may not use the chat box to make any comments or to have sidebar conversations. And please remember to mute our mics unless we are speaking to cut down on the background noise. And finally, I ask that all the remote members turn on their cameras if they are able. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please use the sign-in sheets at the back of the room to indicate which item you're intending to comment on. At the appropriate time for public comment on an agenda item, please line up at the podium to speak. And board members who are here in person, please raise your hand if you wish to comment and speak clearly into the microphone in front of you. If you are viewing the webinar on a personal computer, please ensure that your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback into the room. So with that, we will start the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I wanted to ask Belinda if she would lead us in the pledge this morning. Okay, we'll move on to item 3 on our agenda, and this is the approval of the agenda. Staff, do we have any changes to today's agenda?
Madam Chair, there are no changes. Julie Reagan, TRPA Executive Director. I will note that at the conclusion of the business of the meeting, we will go on a walking tour. And so I just wanted to let the public know that is agendized, and we have members of the Advisory Planning Commission and Placer County joining us for that. We will immediately after the business concludes, we will stay here for a few moments for some introductory comments, and then we'll go outside and enjoy beautiful Kings Beach. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any objections from the board on the agenda? Otherwise, I will deem the agenda approved as posted. And then again, I'd like to remind the board that we are still short a member from California as the appointment to replace Bill Yates has not yet been made. So I'd ask that all our California members stick with us to maintain a quorum today. We'll move on then to item 4, approval of minutes. This is We have a draft set of minutes from June 28th, 2023 on page 31 of our packets and a draft sent from the July 26th, 2023 on page 73 of our packets. Does any member of the committee wish to make a change? It's automatic, Shelley.
You needn't ask. No, listen, staff does a great job. And as usual, there are just a few clerical edits that I've made, and I've shared those with Mario. So subject to those changes, I move to approve the minutes from the June 28th, 2023 Governing Board meeting and the minutes from the July 26th, 2023 Governing Board meeting as amended.
Thank you, Shelley. We have a motion, and I'll just say all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any objections? Motion passes. We'll move on then to item 5 on TRPA's consent calendar today. There is one item on consent which wasn't reviewed by any committee. As a reminder to the public, after board discussion on this item, you may raise your hand in person to be called on or in Zoom to be unmuted by TRPA staff to share your comments. So consent item 1 is the Tahoe City Public Utility District and Tahoe Cross Country Ski Education Association Recreation Cross Country Ski Lodge modification located at 3001 Polaris Road, Tahoe City, California. TRPA file number ERSP 2018-0878. Assessors parcel numbers APNs 093-600-001, 93-160-036, and 93-160-064. Information on this item can be found on page 125 of your packets. We have received 2 written comments on this item from the public, and I would just ask if there's any questions or comments from board members on this consent item.
Madam Chair, the suggestion that somehow using what was preserved from the Schilling home when it was deconstructed, that somehow the proposed use ignores the donor's documented wishes. Can you comment on that?
That the proposal,
That using the Schilling home for this purpose is somehow in contradicts the donor's documented wishes when the building was deconstructed. Do you have any?
I don't know
Understand.
if anyone from the proponents, I mean, my understanding is not only did the owner of the Schilling Lodge pay for the deconstruction and storage, donated significantly to the project being rebuilt with this purpose in mind. And that the Schilling family itself has also been involved in the discussions. I'm seeing nods. Am I correct in this? That the Schilling family themselves have been supportive of this project in preserving the Schilling estate.
Okay, so it doesn't countermand any of their documented wishes. Okay, all right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions or comments from board members? Yes, Mr. Friedrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I've just had the good fortune to talk to many of the project organizers and proponents beforehand, and just learning in more detail about what a community benefiting facility this will be, and all the work they're doing to bring in environmental attributes, solar and air source and ground source heat pumps, and to provide a space where you can be a focal center for outdoor recreation and community building. It seems like this is something we ought to embrace heartily, and I certainly do. So thanks for all the advocates for all the work you've done to get it to this point, and look forward to supporting it.
Thank you. Any other board member comments? Then I'll go to the public. If there's any member of the public who wishes to address the governing board on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone. Are there any members here in the public? Yes. Mr. Robbins.
Oh, that. My name is Jim Robbins. I'm the board president of Tahoe Cross Country Ski Education Association. I just want to thank TRPA staff for the hard work that they put into helping us move this project forward. We are a community benefit organization, and I think that we are helping to fulfill the role that Placer County, Conservancy, and TRPA wish for outdoor activities. So thank you again for your support, and we much appreciate it.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here in the room? Okay, then we'll look online. Catherine, do we have anybody online who would like to comment on this item?
Madam Chair, we have no hands raised online to comment on this item.
Okay, then I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Beat you to it.
Okay,
Can we, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, you'd like me to read a motion to approve the consent calendar? Is that what you made your motion on, Shelley?
Yes. that's what we're on,
Okay.
right.
Thank you. Are there any discussion from the board? Any comments or questions? Okay, Maria, will you call the roll?
Well,
Just approve.
Just approve the consent calendar.
Ms. Aldine,
yes.
Ms. Conrad Seda,
Yes.
Mr. Aguilar.
Yes.
Ms. Faustinos,
Yes.
Ms. Dis,
Yes.
Mr. Friedrich,
Yes.
Ms. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Honigman,
Yes.
Mr. Rice.
Yes.
Ms. Lane,
Absolutely.
Mr. Settlemeyer,
Yes.
Ms. Williamson,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson.
I need to say something even more, but yes.
Madam
Congratulations.
Chair, the motion.
They've worked long and hard on this. We appreciate all your efforts. Okay, with that, we'll move on to planning matters. Item 6 on today's agenda, public hearings. And that is 6A State Route 28 Corridor Plan Implementation Chimney Beach Trailhead Parking Lot Improvements. Information on this item can be found on page 179. And as a reminder to the public, after staff presentation and board discussion, you may raise your hand in person to be called on or in the Zoom webinar to be unmuted by TRPA staff to share your comments. And I do believe we've received some public comment on this item. I don't have the names in front of me, but I know that the board has received that. We've received a number of public comments. So I'll turn it over to Julie. Are you going to
Yes.
start off?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Julie Reagan, TRPA's Executive Director. For the record, I wanted to welcome our colleagues from the U.S. Forest Service here, Eric Walker and Mike Gabor, who will be joining Shannon Friedman, our incredible planner in this project discussion. But to set a little context, I thought it would be important for the board to look at this from a holistic standpoint before we dive into the details of the actual project. This summer and the last several summers, recreational patterns have been of great import and interest of the community. Roadside parking along the corridor of 28 and 89 on the California side have just garnered a lot of attention, and there is a lot of work to be done to improve safety and improve the experience for our visitors and our local residents who need to get to and fro. And I wanted just to remind the board, this is one of many projects within the entire 28 corridor. There is an existing agreement and signatories to an MOU that will be working for many years to come. And in visiting with many members of our delegation for the Tahoe Summit, which we'll talk about later, this came up as something that we've all collectively in the basin been working on for, decades and decades. And I think for the first time in a long time, we actually are making some headway in addressing some of those challenges. So it's a phased approach, including many, many partners. And certainly the partnership work that we're doing will further the goals of destination management and destination stewardship, which we have briefed you on many times And when you think about holistically from a macro standpoint of what our economy in Tahoe has historically been driven by tourism, the transition from a gaming-based economy 20 years ago into an outdoor recreation-based economy. If you think of it from that standpoint, when people used to really be drawn to Tahoe to come and go inside to recreate, and now that is no longer the case. Gaming is one amenity of many. But we didn't drastically enhance the infrastructure to accommodate that shift. We've been doing it, building more trails piece by piece through the environmental improvement program and the great work of our partners. But I think now we have a system and an energy and a momentum around funding to address those critical infrastructure needs to support that outdoor recreation boom in the last 20 years. So with that context, I really appreciate everyone who's worked very hard on this, and Shannon Friedman will kick off this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Madam Chair and Governing Board members. My name is Shannon Friedman, planner at TRPA. And today we are going to talk about the State Route 28 corridor plan and specifically seek approval for the Chimney Beach Trailhead Upgrade Project. And as Julie mentioned, we're joined with our partners from the Forest Service, Eric Walker and Mike Gabor. They're the applicant for the project and a very important partner along the State Route corridor. And Carl Hasty with the Tahoe Transportation District is also here as another important partner along the corridor, and he will be giving some brief context at the end of my presentation as well. The Chimney Beach Trailhead Upgrade Project proposes to expand the existing parking lot at the Chimney Beach Trailhead to provide replacement parking for parking that is currently occurring along the corridor. It will also provide trailhead facilities and extend the no parking zone. So before we go into the specifics about the project itself, I wanted to provide some history and context about the corridor. So the section of State Route 28 that we're talking about is in Nevada from Incline Village to Spooner Summit, and it crosses multiple jurisdictions, including Washoe County, Douglas County, and a portion of Carson City as well. And this corridor provides access to a lot of popular recreation sites, including miles of popular shoreline of Lake Tahoe, as well as on the mountainside, the backcountry, mountain biking and hiking trails. The desire and the demand to access these recreation facilities really exceeds the facilities to support that. The safe parking lots and trash and signage does not meet the demand. And this has been going on for a lot of years. And what that results in is people parking along the shoulder of State Route 28, which we all see as we drive along that corridor. And there are a lot of unintended consequences to that, including safety of the public, scenic resource impacts, erosion impacts. A lot of the shoulder parking is on steep slopes that are directly connected to Lake Tahoe, and also kills a lot of the vegetation there, which further destabilizes the slope. And then also creates a lot of user-created volunteer trails and has trash and litter impacts as well. So there are a lot of unintended consequences to people trying to access the recreation amenities along this corridor. Realizing all of these issues, 13 partners came together in 2013 to take a hard look at this corridor and develop the first corridor management plan within the Tahoe Basin, the State Route 28 National Scenic Byway Corridor Management Plan. And this corridor management plan took a hard look at all of the issues that were occurring along this corridor. And they collectively came up with 5 goals that they could all align around. And those include protecting Lake Tahoe, improve public safety, promote economic vitality, enhance the visitor experience, and expand transportation choices. That corridor plan also recommended a suite of projects and actions that implementers and partners could take that would improve the corridor and achieve these 5 interrelated goals. Next slide, please. Building upon the corridor management plan, the Forest Service developed the State Route 28 Shared Use Path Parking Safety and Environmental Improvement Project environmental assessment for NEPA and initial environmental checklist for TRPA to analyze the impacts of projects that were recommended in that corridor management plan. The limits of that were from Sand Harbor to Spooner Summit and analyzed impacts of providing replacement parking at some parking lots. That includes expanding parking at existing parking lots and creating one new parking lot at Spooner Summit. It analyzed continuing the state line to state line shared use trail, which would construct that trail from Sand Harbor all the way to Spooner Summit. And then improving transit options along the corridor, Vista Points, and then as part of the Spooner parking lot, providing a permanent aquatic invasive species inspection station. So it analyzed a suite of actions along that corridor, and that EA was finalized in 2019 and found that those projects would not have a significant effect on the environment. Next slide, please. This is the proposed action map from that EA. And again, it just shows the limits of the proposed project. You can see Sand Harbor to the north and Spooner Summit and Spooner Lake to the south. The Chimney Beach parking lot is just south of the Sand Harbor. You can see there on the map. There is an existing parking lot at Sand Harbor right now. It only has 21 parking spaces and portable restrooms, which again is not enough to meet the demand that that area provides near the Chimney Beach.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you. The Chimney Beach parking lot provides access to a lot of popular beaches right there, as well as trails connecting people up to Marlet Lake that you can see on the right side of that map. Next slide, please. Part of the analysis done in the EA was looking at the number of vehicles that are currently parked along the road shoulder. So the Forest Service consulted with LSC to do surveys. This data is from 2016. And they surveyed the roadway during average and peak times to see how many vehicles were parked along the roadway shoulder. And they broke it up into discrete segments, as you can see on that map, based on where there was existing parking lots, where there was access points to recreation facilities along the corridor. And those are broken up by names and color coded on this map, as you can see. So the proposal for the Chimney Beach trailhead is to reconfigure the parking lot to provide 109 new parking spaces. That would be a total of 130 parking spaces at that parking lot. You can see on the map, it says 140 stalls, and that's what the EA analyzed. It analyzed up to 140 stalls. So this is just below that, well within the impacts that were analyzed in that EA. As I've mentioned, we'll keep on going. Okay. Expanding the Chimney Beach parking lot will also extend the no parking zone on State Route 28. The area that no parking will be extended includes Thunderbird Cove, which is that magenta outline there, and then Chimney Beach as well, which is the blue right below that. And you can see there was a range between the average and peak numbers there for the amount of vehicles parked in that corridor, but the replacement parking will not exceed those numbers, but it will provide a safe and environmentally friendly place for people to park. And then as the corridor management plan is further built out, there will be transit, the bike trail, and other ways for people to access the corridor as well. Next slide, please. The project will be broken into two phases. Phase one includes reconfiguring the parking lot to build the 130 replacement parking spaces. It includes extending the no parking zone, as we just illustrated on that map below. And then also includes amending the State Route 28 interlocal agreement. So after the corridor management plan was finalized, all of the partners came together to sign a interlocal agreement. And that is really critical to the implementation of the whole corridor management plan. It assigns and identifies roles and responsibilities for all of the partners along the corridor in terms of implementation, operations and maintenance, enforcement of no parking, et cetera. So it really further aligned all of the partners, and amending that is critical to the success. It was written in a way to be amended. So as projects were designed and implemented, that agreement could be amended to respond to the implementation and operations and maintenance of those new projects. Next slide, please. Phase 2 of the Chimney Beach project will include all of the trailhead support facilities. This includes adequate restrooms and trash facilities, improved signage, a transit pullout, a crossing at State Route 28 so people can get from this parking lot down to the beach, and then things like bicycle racks as well. Next slide, please. The schedule for the project is as follows. Phase 1, which is expansion of the parking lot and extending the no parking, will occur in the summer of 2023 and potentially the summer of 2024. Phase 2 planning and design will occur over the winter of 2023-24, and phase 2 implementation will occur in the summer of 2024. Next slide, please. And I wanted to talk a little bit about future projects that are going to be occurring along the corridor, because as I mentioned, this is just one project in the corridor. But in order to achieve all of the goals that were identified in the corridor management plan that the projects agreed to, it's important to recognize these other projects. And they include incorporating intelligent transportation systems, ITS, and that is basically using technology to help us meet our transportation needs. So that's something like changeable dynamic message signs, or using cell phone apps to let people know, like, hey, the Chimney Beach parking lot is full, so park at the Spooner Mobility Hub and take transit there, or take your bike there. It also includes parking management, so the ability to have paid parking along the corridor. And I will note that the Chimney Beach parking lot does have power, and infrastructure is going in along State Route 28. So these items can be incorporated into the parking lot when they are ready to be implemented. And then future projects also include continuing that shared use trail from Sand Harbor to Spooner Summit, expanding the Secret Beach parking lot, which is just south of the Chimney Beach parking lot. And when that project is built, it will further expand the no parking zone because more safe off-highway parking will be provided. And then there's also a new parking lot at Spooner Summit planned that will be a Spooner Mobility Hub. So include transit services, and that will also include the permanent aquatic invasive species inspection station. Next slide, please. With that, I was going to invite Carl Hasty with the Tahoe Transportation District up, and he was just going to provide a little bit more context on corridor planning and the process for that.
Good morning. And if it's possible, if you could just put the slide up of one of the maps, that would be fine. So happy to be here with you this morning. Give you a little more kind of operational context of what it takes to put these kind of projects together. I'm excited to see this finally happening. These things take a long time. We approached this, and my history with the corridor goes back to at least 25 years when we attempted, when I was at TRPA, to provide and get to the same kind of agreement that we have in the corridor now. We couldn't achieve that. We had those kind of problems back then. And when it came into TTD role in 2009, and we started to address the feasibility of a Nevada state line to state line bike trail, we were tackling then the 28 corridor again. So we took a different approach. Time was a little riper as well for the land management agencies because things had gotten a little messier. And the uncontrolled access was a big driver here in terms of the interest of being able to get 13 different organizations together to agree. So that is to agree on the solutions. The interlocal agreement has been a very effective tool to date to kind of keep us there at the table. Where we all agree on who's doing what. And to give you an illustration, it's kind of a classic Tahoe story of leveraging each other. That first 3 miles, for example, is where TTD is overseeing and managing the paid parking on that trailhead, which sits on NDOT right of way, where Washoe County has agreed to provide the long-term maintenance, and Nevada State Parks has agreed to provide the annual maintenance. We do paid parking and plan to along this corridor for 2 main reasons. One is partially behavior change to try to not have everyone show up at the same time, the same peak time. So we do that through pricing. The other is to actually provide revenue for maintenance and at least offset a good portion of our O&M costs for both the trail and the parking. Because capital dollars are easier to find than operating dollars. So those are part of the partnership that has come through here. So we're here in support of the Forest Service. TTD will be designing the Secret Harbor project next. And then as noted, we're working together with a number of partners on the Spooner lot itself, as well as pursuing dollars to get the trail connections happening as well as transit. So that's my other part of the context here. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. And that concludes our presentation. So at this time, we will take questions from the governing board. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. So yes, we'll start at the end. We'll come
Well,
to
thank you for
play.
the presentation. You know, driving this corridor pretty regularly, it's very dangerous. There's going to be a child that's going to get run over. How do you increase the size of the lot even more?
I don't think the solution is increasing the size of the lot anymore. It's a balance between providing the safe off-highway parking lots and then providing the other opportunities for access. So transit is a big piece of it. As we mentioned, there's going to be a new parking lot at Spooner Summit, which is going to have up to, I think, 200 spaces and a transit, like a mobility hub. And then each parking lot, as well as other places along the highway, will have transit stops. And then there will also be the trail for those that would like to access recreation spaces, the recreation spots via other measures. So I think the solution is multifaceted in providing safe ways for people to access the corridor, not just parking spots for the private automobile. So, and implementation of the whole corridor management plan will provide all of those things.
I'm just going to go down the row, I think. Did you have another comment or question?
Just to follow up, what's the timing of all this?
So the Chimney Beach parking lot is going to be constructed this year and potentially a portion of next year. The Secret Harbor parking lot, as Carl with the Tahoe Transportation District said, is in the process of being planned. The Spooner Summit parking lot, same thing. We're actively working on that. We actually have an agreement with the Nevada Department of Transportation, and they have a team that are under contract, will be under contract soon in like a week to work on design of that parking lot, and then implementation will come after. So these projects will be implemented in the coming years.
So like 10 years, 3 years?
Well, this one, the next year, I would say Spooner. I mean, there's still some funding that needs to be obtained, but I would say within the next 10 years, they will be.
Okay. I don't
implemented.
think we have 10 years to really sit quietly and wait for these projects to be completed. Again, I'm stressed. It is scary. There are kids running across those streets. They jump out of those cars. People are driving. And if we don't find a solution immediately, there is going to be a tragedy there. And so I don't know if this board or this group can create some urgency or make this a priority at an even higher level, or if it's conversation with Nevada state government. I mean, there has to be a better and quicker solution.
Mhm. I do not disagree. And I think that it's a big partnership. So the support that we have from everyone will go a long way. So I appreciate that. And I don't know if the Forest Service had something to add, and then it looks like Julie did as well. So.
Good morning, TRPA Board, Madam Chair. I wanted to add a little bit, Mike Bohr from the Forest Service, represent the engineering department there, and the staff that did the design for the current parking lot that we're proposing at Chimney Beach. To add to the conversation about more capacity at Chimney Beach, I think I just had my Wisconsin accent come out a little bit when I get nervous, so. There is not sufficient space to build more parking at the Chimney Beach trailhead. We actually, during the NEPA and environmental analysis, the consultant on board, Wood Rogers, helped us with looking at the maximum space we could fit in that location. And we are actually maxed out, which is why it's 130, not 140, and why there's not more numbers proposed there. We have looked at Secret Harbor. I did meet with several staff from TRPA, TTD, out at Secret Harbor to look at another location potentially at Secret Harbor, which we're going to be proposing a change to the environmental document to do it a possible different location at Secret Harbor because there's better space, safer, more opportunity to maybe increase some numbers in that location, which would be a little more central to the corridor and the interest for people in that location. And to talk about timing, we're moving fairly rapidly at Chimney Beach, which is why we're here out first, trying to get this in place immediately. And I know Carl is representing a group that's working very hard on the Spooner project. They're really pushing for 24 for construction. And we're actively trying to get this Secret Harbor piece done. I think one of the components we're going to need help with is the bike path, as well as getting our partners and stakeholders in alignment with all the components that are needed to make this entire project happen in terms of being able to move people around, the messaging, reservation systems, whatnot, that might be coming forward in future years and opportunities to really address the safety out there.
Carl, did you want to respond? Okay. Oh, Julie, I'm sorry.
And just Madam Chair, just before, I know there are a lot of questions. I just wanted to build on the comments, Julie Reagan for the record, and echo Secretary of State Aguilar's sense of urgency. I mean, this is an urgent situation and it's something that's been continuing to build. And to be honest, the amount of funding that it will take to build out this corridor is about $70 million. And we have not been in a position to really execute more than little incremental solutions. And now we are, with the support we're getting from our federal delegation, from the state, from the private sector, the Tahoe Fund and other partners along the way. And so I just wanted to let the board know, our partners are taking this really seriously in terms of a sense of urgency. We have convened like task forces within our staff to meet monthly, because there's a lot of players involved. And another piece of this, you saw the picture on the screen is enforcement. And law enforcement and the judicial system have been very leery of enforcing parking restrictions when there weren't other good options for people to park or to even to get there in the first place. So building out these improvements for transportation, for parking, safe off-road options, the trail system will then now allow law enforcement and the judicial branch to go forward with those tickets, the $300 for the parking, and then even up to $1,000 for over, as they say, the fog line on the highway. So the pieces are aligning and we are sharing that sense of urgency. I just wanted the board to know that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think well, did you want, go ahead, Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to add on the same subject, we did the tour with the Tahoe Summit. It was interesting that a while back it was $40 for a parking ticket. And several people were just contemplating that in San Francisco, that's the day parking rate anyways. So they just went ahead and parked. The CHP relayed a story where they actually towed a vehicle out of the way and another person literally came and parked in the very spot that they just vacated. And so luckily the fees are being increased to try to address this issue, but I share the Secretary of State's concern. As I look at some of the situations, I question if we can have a discussion with Caltrans and NDOT and entities so that, like up at Emerald Bay, when I'm looking at a 2-foot pipe to convey water underneath the road and there's a 6-foot elevational change, why not increase that to make a walking trail, not only to convey more water during flood runoff, but also provide an opportunity for people to use that to safely traverse the road underneath, not over, they kept saying, well, there's not enough room for an overpass. No, I'm not talking an overpass. Underpasses that could be strategically placed, understanding that will require more funds for that size of a portage, but I don't see any reason why we shouldn't try to continue to have those discussions to try to help safety concerns, because I share those concerns as you watch people try to dart across the road, and sometimes they're too busy looking at the beautiful scenery to pay more attention to the road, and drivers have the same problem. But thank you for allowing me to editorialize.
Thank you. Ms. Lane, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Secretary of State, for bringing that up, because I think, and your explanation was really put things into context But I think for a lot of us who've been in the basin for a long time, we get used to Tahoe time and the short construction seasons, and it just seems like everything takes longer than it should. But thank you for reminding us that, you know, we shouldn't get used to that, and we shouldn't just be okay with accepting that when we can avoid it. The question that I wanted to ask was, there's a sentence in here that talks about infrastructure to support a future parking management system. And I'm curious as to what that means.
Thank you. That's the underground utilities that are occurring along the corridor and making sure the site has power. So there can be the kiosks and meters for people to pay to park there. So the first project that was implemented along this corridor was the first 3 miles of trails from Incline Village to Sand Harbor, and that included some parking lots by the Tunnel Creek Cafe, just as you enter Incline Village. And that has had some paid parking there, and they use like dynamic parking management. So you get charged differently depending on when you go. And that has proved to be a really successful project. So it's providing the infrastructure so that can come online when it's available for the rest of the corridor.
Going down the, Ms. Aldine?
Next. So I understand this is going to be paid parking, but I'm just wondering, in order to facilitate the change in behavior, if it wouldn't be advisable if there's flexibility within the budget to allow for free parking in the first season, to get people accustomed to not parking along the roadway, but using the parking facility, and then impose a fee the following season once they become accustomed to relocating their cars.
We did that with the existing trailhead parking for the first 3 miles. That was the approach that we took there. And I do think that was helpful with folks. And I think what will help with this situation too, to add to Shannon's talk about utilities, is part of the support infrastructure that's also been missing is essentially fiber optic and broadband, because Wi-Fi is not a very robust system on the 28 corridor, let alone other places at Tahoe. I'm happy to say that, you know, part of what we've been doing is working with the Nevada Office of Science and Information Technology, and they have been successful now with a winning bid to implement broadband in there, which will help us then with folks and start to get to this app kind of application, not only when people are down at the beach and want to pay more to, I want to stay longer, but to be able to inform folks like Shannon was talking about, going, this is full. So we're very excited about that prospect. And we do expect to see that both on the 28 corridor as well as the 50 corridor within the next several years when NDOT comes in and does their overlay work and the like. So we can do that for folks when they begin this. And that's been a proven approach, and we'll probably do the same thing here with this.
Great, thank you, Carl.
Mhm.
And then with respect to enforcement, I mean, a lot of people who visit Lake Tahoe are from out of state, and leaving a parking ticket, a lot of people ignore those parking tickets. And I don't think we have the resources to pursue them legally. So in the agreement that's being developed, I mean, well, one of the options by law enforcement, I'm assuming, will be booting, potentially. Towing is problematic because those cars are so tightly fit that, you know, being able to tow a vehicle is almost impossible. But booting would be an option, just to immobilize the vehicle, and that certainly get the attention of the driver. So I don't know whether or not, Shannon, that's being contemplated.
Shannon Friedman, for the record. Booting hasn't specifically been discussed, at least in conversations that I've had, but that's certainly could be on the table. The Nevada Highway Patrol and Washoe County are part of the corridor management team, and they are also signatories of that interlocal agreement. And they have agreed to enforcement along this corridor. And part of that was increasing the tickets along this corridor to $300. So a little more meaningful than the $40. And, you know, as you mentioned, towing is difficult just logistically, but also from a resource issue as well. So that can certainly be part of the discussion. And as we update the interlocal agreement, the Nevada Highway Patrol will be at the table and will be recommitting to enforcing on these sections of roadway. And we can certainly bring that up as an option, as well as other parking deterrents like physical barriers, other things that can deter people from parking and using these alternative spots to access the corridor.
Okay, great. Thank you, Shannon. And also, looking at the errata sheet we have, it says that condition 8 was deleted because it was considered redundant. If you read section 6 under the permit language, but I noticed the one thing missing in paragraph 6 is any reference to identifying funding needs and resources. So it's not completely redundant. And I'm just wondering, is that just implied as part of the operations and maintenance interlocal agreement, looking at funding sources and other potential resources?
Yeah, collectively looking for funding and working together to leverage all the funding to implement these projects and plan them is part of the corridor management plan and
great.
can be part of that interlocal agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Just a quick question, given that there will be electricity there, how many EV parking spots would be potential in the lot or in that entire corridor? Just knowing that people do park for a long time, the convenience of being able to charge is incredibly high.
That is a good question. I'm going to defer to the Forest Service.
For the record, Mike Bohr, Forest Service. We've had a lot of partners coming to us with the request to install EV charging stations, and this would be ripe for that. They would need to do a new power drop transformer, and then the number of spots. That's a great question. I think it would be up to the partner how many they'd be willing to put in because of the expense of putting those in. But certainly once they do that, they're being paid for that parking. So I don't think we would have a limitation on the number that are put in. It would be up to the partner installing that. So I could foresee there could be 10, 20 spots there pretty easily in the near term, and long term, it would probably be more than that.
Okay, great. I would just encourage when you think about engineering and sort of tooling the area, that enough electric is put in the beginning to ensure that those spots can be provided in the long run, and even, potentially solar panels in the long run to provide some electricity for the needs there. So just thinking about longer term, the sustainability and the type of use that we'll be seeing in the basin.
Great. And I know there's more comments to my left, but Mr. Rice, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you. Actually, one of my questions is rather redundant because it's already been expressed. I come from a law enforcement background, and I have witnessed some of the problems that have been discussed regarding people just seeing it is their parking fine being just part of the experience. And if we are able to convince the courts to increase the fine to $350, and if we can get the law enforcement personnel to actually write the citation, because I know from experience how short our personnel are along that corridor, both Highway 50 as well as 28. And I'm wondering where we're going to get the resources to do the enforcement. Thank you.
Who wants to take that?
Well, it goes back to that interlocal agreement and the corridor management plan, and they have committed in the past. There was a kind of a pilot project around Sand Harbor where there was increased signage, increasing that fine to $300, and then commitment from law enforcement to enforce, and that proved to be very successful. So there's a track record on this corridor to have success with enforcing no parking. So we're going to continue to engage with those partners and rely on that partnership to enforce the no parking, and then implement some of the other measures that would deter parking as well.
if I may add, Carl Hasty, we've also been looking at meaning TTD as well as the Tahoe Fund, who's been supporting some evaluation of some suggestions. We've been looking very closely, not only from the law enforcement side, but also the kind of that paid parking enforcement aspect, kind of cutting our teeth on that. The TTD board has asked that staff bring to the TTD board, an update on what's going on with parking and parking enforcement, what are options. There may be some ways to helping, that's not a full-fledged officer, but another way of being able to provide some other human resources to the issue. So those are, I think, they're the types of things that we'll all be looking at more in the future.
Okay, Ms. Hill, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a question, just I wanted to say that I agree with Secretary of State Aguilar's statements about how important it is that we move forward with these projects quickly. I'm in full support, and I really appreciate the team. And I know it takes so many hands in different jurisdictions to make these projects work. And I'm glad that Member Rice brought up enforcement, because that is something, and Mr. Hasty, that is something that TTD is looking at. And I will say, this last budget cycle, sadly, we did not receive the state of Nevada bonds for Spooner, the connection to Spooner. And I think we've got to figure out, all hands on deck to find out how we can fund all of these projects. And, I'm willing to be an ambassador for TRPA and TTD to see what we can do to move these forward, because it takes a lot of money, but it is, people's lives and also deterioration of the lake, obviously, with the vehicles parked how they are. So thank you.
Thank you. And just a reminder, we're talking about a parking lot project. I know we're getting into corridor management, and that's not agendized specifically, but it is so critical to this. So Council Marshall, you'll just keep reminding me and the board that we should stay on the project in front of us and not all of the management. But it is important to see how it's fitting into that overall corridor management plan. Other questions? Yes, Ms. Dis.
I just wanted to clarify or confirm the crossing at the new parking lot. That will be in place at the same time as the new parking lot opens, right? We're not going to open the parking lot and then add the crossing.
That is correct. That will most likely be implemented by the Nevada Department of Transportation, being their roadway that they operate and maintain. And they might also be implementing the transit pullout section of it, but they do have a project coming through there where those items will be incorporated. And yes, it's important as part of this to provide that visible crossing across the highway.
Okay. Next, going down, Mr. Friedrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was Mike, I said go Badgers. And I wanted to second Ashley's admonition that we prepare the site as much as possible for EV charging, solar canopy, if there's solar attributes there. Makes a lot of sense, and certainly increasingly folks will be showing up in EVs. So let's support that. And I also want to just also definitely second Secretary Aguilar's urgency on the corridor management. I think this the parking lot alleviates that if it's a replacement. I know that's the intention, not additive parking. So my questions, and I have raised this concern before, we see Emerald Bay, Zephyr Cove, it's all the same problem. We see there people are ignoring no parking signs. They're not deterred by fines. They're not being towed. We're not having much enforcement. I know we're having discussions there. So my question is, learning from that, those examples, Shannon, you mentioned physical barriers. I know Caltrans was quoted in the Tribune last week of saying they recommended boulders along Emerald Bay. Is there a reason why we can just go there right now, knowing that enforcement, as Wes pointed out, is difficult? We have whether it actually happens, whether people are deterred by it. So to truly get replacement and get people off the road, given that concern, is there a reason why we can't just go straight to physical barriers, whether they be boulders or the kind of the orange traffic barrels or another physical deterrent?
Yeah, Shannon Friedman, thank you for the question. There is not a reason why we could not do that straight away. TRPA would support the installation of some type of physical barrier. We would need to work with the partners along the corridor, specifically NDOT, to have a physical barrier that they would approve and that wouldn't cause damage to a vehicle and create its own safety issues. But we are supportive of some physical barrier, and that can certainly be implemented in part of the conversation as we talk about extending the no parking zone along that corridor with our partners, including NDOT and NHP.
Have those conversations started with NDOT? Is there any concern that they've expressed about putting in the barrier?
I'm going to let Mike Gabor with the Forest Service take that.
Mike Bohr, Forest Service for the record. So yes, we have put in barriers with our partners on projects. So I'll drop south to Round Hill and explain a little bit about what happened there. So when we were working with Federal Highways on that project, the beam guard, which is on the lake side of the highway, was not required by Federal Highways. I specifically requested that it be added to the project because if we didn't physically block people from parking right there, it's too inviting to pull over onto the shoulder to immediately run down the hill to go into Round Hill. So that beam guard is there not because of the slope. It was for parking and preventing parking. An unintended consequence was the parking that occurred shortly thereafter this summer on the east side. And 4 different agencies came together rapidly to get no parking signs installed. Douglas County, NHP, to enforce that parking, the no parking at Round Hill. So we should see that through Labor Day improving in what occurred there right now. But to talk a little bit more about 28, I've been working for a few years with NDOT as their projects come in to be permitted for Forest Service, because that highway is on Forest Service managed lands. We're working with them to make sure they're putting in these soft barriers, I'll call that, even though it's riprap. So they're doing things to try to discourage people from parking their cars on the side, but some people still do drive up onto the rocks and over the edge. So we're trying to meet that need to discourage the parking and making it not appear that we're physically putting barriers on the side of the road while making it still look like it's erosion control and stuff.
And why is there the need to make it appear that you're not putting physical barriers? Isn't that wouldn't that be the thing you want people to see so they don't park there?
I guess I was referring more to like concrete barriers right immediately to the highway.
Got it. All right. Well, good. Thanks for the discussion. It just seems like to me that's a solution throughout the lake. Until people just can't physically park there, they will. And we'll just get more parking, not replacement. So thank you.
Great. And I'm just going to remind us again to stay on this project. And it sounds like we need a corridor management plan update because I think these are excellent suggestions, but we have a parking project moving forward. So yes, Ms. Vaughn.
For you.
Okay, thank you. So this is a parking question. It has to do with providing parking for single passenger vehicles while we're encouraging people to reduce VMTs and travel, on shuttles and all. And, particularly on the California side, I'm more familiar with a lot of the access programs that are being promoted right now. We're having shuttle buses, which will bring, groups of youth, church groups, whatever they might be, seniors. Is there going to be parking space provided for any kind of shuttle bus type situation in this configuration?
Mike Gabor for the record. So yes, that usually is worked out in our partner agreement for the management of the site. So we'll be working with a partner for the management of the parking lot itself. Potentially will be the TTD, and they can identify spots for multi-passenger vehicles and whatnot. That is really a more of an operational sequence, but we would definitely be allowing that.
Yeah. Well, I'm just concerned about how it would impact 130 parking spaces, because if you have limited space, how is that issue going to be addressed?
For this particular lot, that could be a challenge. I do think, to your question, which is a very good one, as we start to see more even tour buses start to visit Tahoe, because I mean, by my calculations, one bus is full of people, that's worth 16 cars. We're not set up for putting them anywhere. And as you know, charging infrastructure for buses in the future, that's where we get to as well. So we're kind of in this transition area. The other part of the addressing this is by also starting to, as part of the plan, but it's also long-term, is capturing people from outside and being able to shuttle them in so they don't have to park anywhere, including the shuttle bus doesn't have to park. There's a stop, they can let them off. You can pick them up. You can take them back to outside the basin where they did park and then go on their way from there. So that's the other part of the plan. We've been looking at some locations for things like that, access to this corridor. So those are some of the solutions that we'd be having to do. But here, you know, that kind of bus activity would have to be very limited to more of these kind of van conversions that are, you know, you don't have any more than maybe 8 passengers or something like that.
Yeah, recognizing turning radiuses and all of that. I'm not familiar with this lot, but obviously that's a concern. But I would just put that into the head in terms of, you know, planning for that. I think it is a way to effectively address VMT reduction and I think would be, you know, something desirable to have as an outcome.
Absolutely, absolutely. Any other comments or questions from board members? Yes, Secretary.
In regards to Cisco Aguilar, Nevada, in regards to the funding, can you give me a brief overview of how this project's funding? And then second of all, is there any discussion or thought of daily use fees for visitors to help fund some of these projects?
Mike Moore for the record, and Madam Chair, I'll be brief so y'all don't get the hook. So yes, the funding for this project was provided by SNPLMA. We have a SNPLMA project that will pay specifically for the parking, the bathroom, signage, things like that at this particular site. And as far as parking fees, whenever our partner comes online and we put in the ITS structure to manage that, typically we're seeing fees at Forest Service sites on the $10 to $12 range right now. And I know Carl was mentioning the demand level pricing for the parking at the north end there by the cafe. I don't remember what the amounts were though.
But when you discuss these capital projects, is there, I think I was more referring to a daily use fee of visitors coming into the area and into the lake, like most of the national parks. A user fee, I guess, yeah.
Eric, you want to address that?
Eric Walker, Forest Service for the record. So Secretary Aguilar. So right now that has been a topic of conversation amongst the partners in the Lake Tahoe Basin. And it's my understanding, and I would defer to others that right now that's not the approach that we're trying to take. What we're trying to take through destination management, travel management and stuff is to, allow people access into the basin. They are, from my standpoint, I manage, 155,000 acres of public lands that are, for folks to access. And so we, while we look at fees like for parking and stuff, because that will help pay for the maintenance and construction of those facilities, as well as possibly provide other funds for the use that comes from the people parking there. So down, once they get to the lake, the trails and stuff. But as far as putting in a fee to come into the Tahoe Basin, that conversation is still ongoing.
Ms. Reagan.
Julie Reagan, thank you for the record. Just to build on Supervisor Walker's comments, Secretary Aguilar, you've hit a topic that's been going on for years. And the most recent conversation around a user fee or entrance fee of some sort has gone into the Transportation Action Plan process with the bi-state consultation around funding for our infrastructure investments. And we're looking, to raise additional monies, all hands on deck, federal, state, local, private, to make those investments. It also has touched into conversations around the corridor plans and looking at innovations around parking, whether it be cordon pricing, because we know, 2.5 million vehicles go around the 28 corridor, and another 4 million vehicles go around the Emerald Bay 89 corridor. We are putting in an application with Caltrans and the very large MPOs in the state of California, the Metropolitan Planning Organizations. That's an innovative grant looking at road user charge. So it's an ongoing area. It's a very polarizing issue. And I think what we've heard from the majority of our board members is that we want to keep working to solution without putting people in opposite camps. You're kind of for this or that, but looking at more holistically, but realizing that it's an urgent situation.
Again, I don't think in years, obviously, if this has been a conversation as a board member, can I request this to be an agenda topic, or what's my role or what's my responsibility? Because again, if we can't depend, I think, on governments to fund us. I think as a board, we have to figure out what are our solutions and what are the solutions we can bring to the table directly without having to wait for third parties to figure out a solution for us. And I think, again, looking at the situation along 28, it's pretty intense. And I think we have to figure out some really strategic, some really smart, and some really innovative solutions to the challenge. And I think if nobody's going to come up to the table to give us the money or the funding or the 70 million, we as a governing board have to figure out how to come up with that solution on our own. So
Absolutely. And as far as an agenda item, I did text Julie and brought it up a minute ago. It really seems like we should do a workshop on our corridors and some of these, bring us up to speed on where we're at, because there's many groups working on various components and bringing that together into this dialogue. As I think the board we'd all benefit from that discussion.
because there's going to be a tragedy and science is not going to solve that tragedy.
Right.
So
Exactly. Any other board member comments or questions right now? Otherwise, I'm going to go to public comment. If there's members of the public here in the room, please raise your hand. Or if you're on Zoom, you can raise your hand on the Zoom screen, or you can hit *9 and you'll be called on and unmuted. So we'll start here in the room. Gavin Steve. You were hiding behind the podium. I couldn't see you, Mr. Teixeira.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the governing board, Steve Teixeira for the record. I was on the TTD board as a member when we evolved from the point of the original, let's try to work this out together, to the implementation agreement, to the interlocal agreement. And I think there's a really important distinction, and I'm mindful of Councilor Marshall's admonition about this, but there wouldn't be this project if there wasn't a corridor management plan. And corridor management plans, particularly when you have this many different jurisdictions involved, do require that kind of an interlocal commitment, as opposed to sometimes people attempt to do this by a project charter. And so I think it's instructive for us today to understand that the reason this project is really before you today is because there's a corridor management plan, and the foundation of that was an interlocal agreement and not a project charter. So I support the project obviously today, and thank you for your support.
Thank you. Mr. Fight.
Good afternoon, Gavin Feiger, League to Save Lake Tahoe. If you board members haven't met yet. I really appreciate Secretary Aguilar's comments and everybody's. We are in favor of this project. We supported the corridor plan when the environmental assessment was done in 2018, 2019. We did have some, caveats. One of them was enforcement. So glad to hear the discussion here today. Been talking with the project team this week, TTD, TRPA, and the Forest Service. We're confident that based on the success with the Sand Harbor, the North demonstration project, the honestly pretty quick action you took, the Round Hill, unexpected consequences there, that enforcement can happen. The interlocal agreement's definitely the place for that. So I really encourage the board to check in, stay involved, make sure that all the things that you're talking about, which very much echo our concerns at the league, are taken care of through that interlocal agreement. The real opportunities for, we all know what the solutions are, enforcement, booting. There's a thing called a barnacle where you put a big thing on the windshield so people can't drive away. put a truck full of those up there, have a third party, I mean, we can think of a million solutions. Similar to the Forest Service, we've worked with NDOT in the past to help them with their water quality projects, especially around Marlette Creek, to add riprap and rock barriers, which has helped, but it does just push the problem to other places in the corridor. So, and then the last piece, anyway, so on that, with the parking lot specifically, please, stay the course, make sure the enforcement happens. We'll be keeping an eye out and really hope you guys do too. And then I know we're just talking about the parking lot, but speaking of how to fund all these things, the user fee, I mean, the states shot that down, so hopefully there has been some changes in California. I don't know if Nevada has had a bit of a change of heart in user fees, but that is probably the solution to both fund projects like this and to help achieve our vehicle miles traveled threshold, which is coming due at the end of this year too. So, yep, just encourage everybody to stay involved and make sure this enforcement happens. It needs to be a model for the Spooner project next year and for Bayview and the rest of the West Shore corridor. If this doesn't work, it's going to be a bad stain, and people aren't going to be confident that these projects are worth the money in the future. So thank you for your time. I just will add, we really come at this from, we deal with the impacts. So we have volunteers, we have staff, we pick up literally tons of litter. Everybody saw the 4th of July stuff. The East Shore is unbelievable. You should go park somewhere and cruise down there. They just cruise down there. It's crazy. I mean, I'm talking like barbecues in the forest. People haul barbecues down, leave them still warmed out. They're not like it happens once in a while, all the time. The Thunderbird, I mean, Marlette Creek turns into a bathroom. Toilet paper washes out into the lake when it rains. It's unbelievable. I'm happy to share pictures. Our volunteers are tired and our staff is getting real exhausted too. So thanks for helping us find solutions.
Thank you. Well, that was loud. Are there any other members here in the room? I'm not seeing any hands raised. I do think we have some hands online.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have one hand raised online. Nicole, if you unmute and state your full name for the record, you can address the board.
Hi, everybody. I think that was for me, Nicole Rinke, Deputy Attorney General with the California Attorney General's Office. I have just a few clarifying questions today on this item from a purely staff level. I'm curious, I think I saw in one of the slides that the timing of trash facilities would be in phase 2. Can you just clarify that that is accurate and whether there has been any consideration to that being included in phase 1? I have a couple more questions. I don't know if you want me to run through them and then.
Why don't we go through, Nicole, if you don't mind, we'll go through all your questions and then we'll look at responses. So.
Okay, great. The other question I had was, and we've kind of heard other people talking about this, the enforcement topic, it sounds like is addressed in the interlocal agreement with the other agencies. I'm just curious if there's a place where members of the public and members of the board can access that agreement. It sounds like there was a lot of interest in that document and kind of making sure that over time it can be adjusted to accommodate needs as they arise. I also wonder if that would be the place where some of the operational suggestions that have been made today would be addressed. We heard people talking about electric vehicles and carpools and shuttle buses and accommodating those types of things. And I'm curious if those will be, if there will be a way for the board to kind of hear back on those topics and make sure that they're being addressed as the project moves forward. And then my final question is about the environmental review that was done for the project. It looks like TRPA did an initial environmental checklist for the approval of the project, but I think, although again, this is a clarifying question, that relied heavily on the State Route 28 corridor plan. And I'm just curious if there can be some clarification about where the environmental review for this specific project lives. I think it may be that it's in the corridor plan, but that's a larger document that's a little bit hard to navigate to find the specifics for this. Obviously, there's impacts with additional parking to recreational use being increased, and associated impacts could potentially exist there. So wondering if that's been addressed. And also we heard from board members about potential for increased VMT. And also I know that this is adding development and land capability to land. So just wanting to, I would like the opportunity to be able to look at that environmental documentation, and just curious where that could be found. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicole. So we'll start with, are there other public comments first, and then we'll come back to answer any clarifying questions?
There are no other hands raised, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. So then we'll go to, I guess the first one was the trash. Which phase is that in? And can it be increased to phase 1?
Yeah, Shannon Friedman, thank you for those comments. So the trash and those other like trailhead improvements are part of the phase 2 approval. But really what that means is the Forest Service was taking advantage of funding opportunities to get the design and start construction of the parking lot. And then this winter will be designing the placement for all these other improvements, and they will be constructed in 2024. And so they will all be there when the parking lot is open to the public. So we are not going to open the parking lot without adequate restrooms, trash facilities, and those other elements. It's giving us time to approve it in phases and install it in phases. Before I answer the other 2 questions, did you have anything to add to that, Forest Service, about the phasing of the project?
For the record, Mike Gabor, Forest Service, that was correct, Shannon, the way that you laid that out, and we won't be opening the parking lot without the phase 2. It was just timing and when we had to get stuff into contracting that we needed to be rapid, and we'll have all the rest of that in this winter and before the parking lot opens sometime next year.
Thank you, Shannon Friedman again. And so for the environmental review question, the suite of actions were analyzed under the joint NEPA environmental assessment and TRPA initial environmental checklist. It was a joint document that analyzed all of the impacts, including this parking lot, because it is replacement parking there, and with the enforcement a component of it, the analysis found that there would be no increase in capacity along the corridor and no VMT increase. It is increasing coverage and land capability too. So per our code and the MOU we have with the Forest Service will be implementing a restoration project at a 1.5 to 1 ratio. And I have spoken with the Forest Service about that project, and we will be approving that project as part of this permit approval. And they already have a project identified, I believe, within the vicinity of the project area. And I am certainly happy to go over that environmental document more with you at any time.
And Nicole, this is John Marshall. Attachment D, there's a link on the staff report on page 181 to the EAIEC on the LTBMU's website.
And then I also wrote down enforcement, but I forget what the question was. So if you would, would not mind repeating it.
I think the question was, is the interlocal agreement available online? And then a concern that we do the enforcement that we're calling for.
Thank you for the reminder. The interlocal agreement is available to the public. I don't know if it is online right now, but that can be made online, and I'm happy to share that with any member of the public or governing board members. And as it is amended, we are happy to share that with you as well.
Carl, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe TTD has had that in our packets, but is it available through the TTD website?
I would have to look.
Okay.
Quite honestly.
So
We
Nicole
can-
will get back.
We can certainly do that. And just one bit of clarification. So the interlocal agreement right now covers the existing kind of operational components. What we'll be doing as a result of this project is then amending that to now include this area as well, and the Forest Service as a signatory also, and probably
Okay.
Douglas County.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, any other comments or questions? We'll close the public hearing or public comment period. Any further comments from the board? Okay, I'm not seeing any. And so we have 2 motions in front of us for your consideration on this item. The first would be a motion to approve the required findings, including a finding of no significant effect as shown in attachment A. Do I have that motion?
So moved.
Thank you. And we'll do a roll call vote.
Ms. Alding,
Yes.
Ms. Conrad Seda,
Yes.
Mr. Aguilar,
Yes.
Ms. Faustinos,
Yes.
Ms. Dis,
Yes.
Mr. Friedrich,
Yes.
Ms. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Honigman,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
yes,
Ms. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Settlemeyer,
Yes.
Ms. Williamson,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson.
Yes.
Madam Chair, that motion passes.
Thank you. And then the second motion would be to approve the proposed project subject to the conditions contained in the draft permit as shown in attachment B, including the errata that we received after on this. Do I have that motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Aldine. Maria?
Ms. Conrad Seda,
Yes.
Ms. Alding,
Yes.
Ms. Faustinos,
Yes.
Mr. Aguilar,
Yes.
Mr. Friedrich,
Yes.
Ms. Dis,
Yes.
Mr. Honigman,
Yes.
Ms. Hill,
Yes.
Ms. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
yes,
Mr. Settlemeyer,
Yes.
Ms. Williamson,
Yes.
Gustafson.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. And thank you for being here today, Mike and Eric. Appreciate your input. Carl, thank you. We'll move on now to item 7B, an update of climate resilience dashboard for the Tahoe region. This information on this item can be found on page 219. And as a reminder to the public, after staff presentation and board discussion on this item, you may raise your hand in person to be called on or in Zoom webinar to be unmuted by TRPA staff to share your comments. So Devin Middlebrook has joined us and will lead on this item.
Thank you, Chair Gustafson. Devin Middlebrook, Government Affairs Manager at TRPA for the record. Thank you for letting me come here today to talk about our updated climate resilience dashboard. We last spoke with the board for input on this dashboard previously in October of last year. So it's good to come with our progress and get input from the board on the direction we've taken. Next slide. Just want to highlight and provide some context. Obviously, climate change is something that we've all been thinking about and oftentimes think about it as something that's happening in the future or at the end of the century. But just want to really highlight that the climate impact is here today and we're feeling it at the basin. You can see on the image, the top left image is a boulder that fell on Echo Summit last winter, the previous winter, and is in the scar area of the Caldor fire. So that really highlights kind of the compounding impacts of climate change. The lower right image is a picture of one of the trails that is very popular in South Shore for people to commute back and forth from work. And it was really unrideable until about middle of June this year due to increasing water. And one of the adaptation strategies that we're talking about in our active transportation plan, which you'll hear next, is how can we relocate some of these bike trails that are in these low-lying areas to be more resilient and to floods in the future. But really just want to highlight that the climate impacts are here today and things that we're dealing with now, not in the future. Next slide. Today we'll cover the dashboard project, the overall purpose and goals and background of the project, review best practices and the policy and guidelines that our consultant team have developed. The vision and draft metrics, especially where we want the input from the board today, is on those draft metrics. And then next steps. And then just want to highlight the project team. For the project, we brought on a consultant team led by Eco Northwest, including Becky Steckler and Jennifer Cannon, who are here today. And just a shout out to Jennifer. She is a previous TRPA employee. She was with the agency for a number of years and helped work on many of our sustainability projects, including the original iteration of this dashboard and our EV, electric vehicle readiness plan. And we're also joined today by Aleka Seville of Collective Strategies Consulting. Next slide. Overall, on the climate side, on mitigation, the mitigation equation of climate, we do have climate greenhouse gas reduction goals outlined in our sustainability plans, which is to reach net zero by 2045. And that aligns with both California and Nevada's statewide greenhouse gas reduction goals. We did meet our interim target of 15% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2020, but we'll need much more work to meet that 2045 target. Next slide. On the resilience and adaptation side, last year, Basin Partners adopted our Tahoe Climate Resilience Action Strategy that outlines 10 years of funding needs for projects to deal with things that you see on the right, like the boulder that fell in the highway, wildfire, drought, and flooding. So we do have plans both for mitigating and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, but also adapting to climate change and making our communities more resilient. Next slide. So overall, the Tahoe Climate Dashboard, the goal is to create a new and improved dashboard for the region. As part of our original 2014 Sustainability Action Plan, we did create and currently have on Lake Tahoe Info as part of that platform, a sustainability dashboard. Over time, the metrics in there have become either irrelevant or data has become hard to collect, or data metric reporting from various sources has changed. So it was really time to take a look at that and see how can this dashboard better monitor the work we're doing and tell our climate story. And really use it as an engagement tool and build on our previous work and connect it to things like our EIP project tracker, thresholds, and transportation tracker, and then use it as a tool to meet with key stakeholders to discuss opportunities, challenges, priorities for climate. We really do imagine this dashboard as a great resource for all our partners in the basin when they're working on grant applications for climate-related projects, that they can come in here and have key metrics that they can pull into grant applications to not only show the importance of the project that they're applying for grant funding, but also have a way to report out on the impacts of that grant if that is received. Next slide. And then just again, want to really highlight that this dashboard is about connecting all of our existing TRPA initiatives. We're not looking to create a new thing with new metrics and new monitoring and keep adding on, but the climate dashboard really is in the middle there and connecting. Those are little screen icons of all the different components of the Lake Tahoe Info platform. So how can we take all of the work we're doing and connect it into a cohesive story around climate for the region? Next slide. Where are we at in this process? So we kicked off earlier this year with our consultant team, and they've done a lot of research on best practices, looking at our existing metrics across all of our programs, and working with stakeholders through a stakeholder workshop and many interviews on what people want to see, what's important to measure. We've engaged over 35 different partner agencies, organizations, business community, social services groups through that process. And now we're here where we have our draft metrics and wanted to come to this board before we finalize those metrics for input and make sure you all had a chance to give your input before we have things too finalized. And then over the fall and winter, we'll be working on finalizing those metrics and developing the technical side of the dashboard and making it nice and easy to use for folks and easy to understand, and launching in spring of next year. Next slide. And then finally, just on those goals, again, it's to build the dashboard to bring more of a broad understanding to climate action in the region. And we really want to focus our metrics on regional significance. So we want to make sure that what we're tracking isn't specific to one neighborhood or one jurisdiction. We really want to make sure that this takes a regional approach and is connected to our existing planning documents and guidelines, including our regional plan and our regional transportation plan. And then increase awareness and preparation of climate change in the general public. So the dashboard will include calls to action and ways folks in the community can get involved in becoming more climate resilient. Next slide. And then, just to really put a fine point on the fact that it is based on a lot of different plans. Oftentimes in our best practices research, other climate dashboards were based on one plan, one organization, one jurisdiction. So the added, I think, benefit and maybe challenge of the Tahoe region, but we're used to dealing with it is really connecting across different jurisdictions and the many plans in the Tahoe Basin, and building off of the work that we've done to date on climate. Next slide. And now with this slide, I'm going to hand it over to Aleka Saville from the planning team to go into depth on our best practices research.
Great. Thanks so much, Devin, and thanks everyone. Again, my name is Aleka Saville. I'm principal and founder at Collective Strategies Consulting. Really excited to be here with you all and just thrilled to have the opportunity to support all of the important work that TRPA is doing. So thank you for that. I'm going to talk a little bit about, after Devin gave that great introduction, just to give you a little bit more information on that best practices research that Devin mentioned. So our team reviewed best practices for developing indicators and metrics, and then we also reviewed existing climate dashboards to really identify some key dashboard design features that would be most relevant to this dashboard redesign. So I'm just going to go over a few of the highlights that really guided our recommendations. So first, we really feel strongly that the dashboard should be organized around goals and linked to specific long-term outcomes. And so this is really going to enable TRPA to make direct connections between what you're measuring and your goals. And this organization also helps you prioritize the metrics most relevant to your goals. Second, the dashboard should include indicators related to climate planning that can be measured and tracked using specific performance metrics. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about the difference between an indicator and a metric on the next slide. But to go over these highlights, to go back to that, so ensuring indicators and metrics reflect local climate action goals and plans and being consistent with what the agency is already committed to report on. So this is really critical because we want to make sure that you're able to help users understand what you're measuring and why, and how that reflects all those plans that Devin mentioned. And so that you can also evolve the dashboard as those plans and those goals evolve. So as you can see, we included this graphic and that illustrates the 10 pillars that the Tahoe Central Sierra Initiative, the TCSI framework for resilience, that framework represents those desired outcomes of restoring landscape resilience. So the dashboard metric list that we develop reflects this framework, specifically several of the natural systems metrics, such as the measures of acres of high quality wetland and meadows, and increases in forest health through protecting tree species. These relate directly to those pillars, and that's one example of how we're really trying to integrate all the great work that's already going on, and also help you really communicate that to all of your different users and stakeholders. And then finally, we recommend strongly setting clear expectations for users about how often the performance metrics are going to be updated, and then providing explanations if some metrics will be updated more frequently than others. So this is really not about being perfect, it's about being transparent so that users really understand your thought process behind when these are updated, and then they also understand what's actually possible in terms of data availability and staff capacity. So on that note too, just as we mentioned, we will be creating a monitoring plan with recommendations and guidance for how often to update the metrics based on the metric itself and the data available. Next slide, please. Okay, so as we mentioned, again, we're proposing organizing the dashboard to be focused on these long-term goals, long-term outcomes. And as you can see, it's about supporting resilient natural, built, and social systems, and then also tracking local climate conditions. So I think this is really key as well, because this is how TRPA is looking at their threshold standards. So it provides some consistency in approach, as well as a way for the dashboard users to really understand the region's priorities. And so within that, as I mentioned, the difference between an indicator and a metric, as you can see here, we have that like high level goal that we mentioned. So for example, supporting resilient built systems. What you can do is you can think of an indicator as a trend that really advances a long-term outcome or goal. And then the performance metric is something that helps you assess the direction of a trend at a given point in time. So going with that example, if we have that long-term goal of resilient built systems and supporting those, as an example, a transportation-related indicator might be to upgrade transportation systems to be more sustainable and reduce transportation-related emissions. And then one of the metrics that would be used to help assess progress towards that indicator would be something like measuring and tracking the amount of transportation access in priority communities. So, you know, how many folks in those communities are within a fourth of a mile of a transit stop. So you can see how granular those metrics could get. And you're going to have a lot of metrics metrics that actually inform those indicators that then inform those goals. So this is really all about making those clear connections and pathways between what you're measuring and how it helps you understand where you are in terms of your long-term goals. Next slide, please. So you can see here a little bit more about how that natural built and social systems organization works. And I want to note here that the supporting resilient built systems, resilient social systems, and resilient natural systems, that organization is really aligned with the state of California's adaptation strategy. And it's also very consistent with how Nevada is approaching climate action. So we also felt like it was a great way to really align TRPA in the region with those statewide perspectives. But as you can see here as well, this reorganization is really very aligned with the existing dashboard, but it provides some more specificity and clarity around the region's goals and how you plan to measure progress towards them. So we also recommended creating a separate section where users can dig into the data to understand climate changes and specifically local climate conditions. And we feel like that's really going to provide valuable context for those regional climate goals. So I'm going to stop there and hand it over to my colleague, Jennifer.
Great. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Jennifer Cannon, Senior Project Manager at Echo Northwest, for the record. I'm excited to be here to be working for Tahoe once again and to be helping out on a project that deals with climate resilient, a topic that I had to work on when I was at TRPA from 2013 to 2017. So we wanted to provide a preliminary look at our design concepts for the dashboard. This will be a website, and so we wanted to lay it out in a way that would be really easy to navigate, user-friendly, and to provide varying levels of information from broad level, big picture goals to more nitty-gritty detail on how we are measuring those goals and why this work is important. So the organization of the dashboard will be organized by those 4 broad level categories that Aleka described earlier. And these are essentially goals. And then within each of those goals, there will be indicators that relate to those goals. And there will be more detail within those individual pages about the metrics, why these indicators and metrics are important for measuring the different indicators. And then also there'll be more information on what people can do and where they can learn more about these individual indicators and metrics. So go ahead and go to the next page. Here's another look at the conceptual design and how we're proposing to lay out the dashboard. This is very preliminary. We are expecting to refine this as we advance our work. But this provides an example of an indicator page, and this will be where the most detail is provided. There will be a title, there'll be narrative that describes what the metric is, an indicator is, and why we care about it, and there'll be information about the citations with existing plans and guiding policies. And there will also be some linkages on metrics that are related to the metric that is featured on that page. And there'll be some links on where you can learn more and what you can do individually. There will also be some more project level information. We thought that was really important to provide some more project examples of what these indicators are related to. For example, there is an indicator that's proposed to look at about improving forest health. And it would be really important to provide some examples through the EIP, Environmental Improvement Program projects that show some of the forest thinning projects and some of those other on the ground examples. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So another part of our project that has been really important is to identify the metrics to include on the Tahoe Climate Resilience Dashboard. A lot of the metrics that are on the sustainability dashboard are fairly out of date. And so this was something that we needed to really take a good look at. We engaged stakeholders, and we also did ample research to identify a list of metrics. And we identified 50 metrics, which is a big number. So we have been wanting to narrow down that number to make it more manageable and to help the staff be able to update these metrics over time in a more feasible manner. So we have a framework of that we're looking at to evaluate these different metrics in a systematic way. And this is a peek at this framework that we developed. It includes several different criteria that we are looking at to be able to evaluate the value add with these different metrics. We looked at the cost of the data associated with operationalizing different metrics. We looked at the utility in informing decision-making processes or investment decisions. We looked at the quality of the metric and the quality of the data. We looked at the staff effort that would be involved with updating the metrics. We anticipate that these will be updated over time, so this is an important thing for us to look at. We also looked at how understandable the metric is and whether the data would be available at a regional scale. We looked at some other bonus considerations related to equity and co-benefits. That was important for us to look at. We have some draft results associated with this evaluation process, but we are also asking stakeholders and the governing board to provide us information on what's important for you, because we want to have some prioritization of these different metrics that are that is included into this process, so that we can come up with a good solid list of metrics that will be put on the final dashboard. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So we have some of the preliminary findings that we have gained from this process of identifying all these metrics and evaluating them. This first slide just describes the first goal related to tracking the local climate conditions. This is actually a topic that is not currently on the sustainability dashboard, but that was deemed to be very important. It's important to understand the changes in the weather and in the precipitation levels and smoke days and what's going on around our local communities. So most of the stakeholders have deemed this to be pretty important to include. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Another area that we have included was to promote resilient natural systems. Much of the metrics that are proposed for this particular goal area is based off of existing and established metrics, such as EIP metrics. There are a few updates that we are getting on the forest health metrics that we're aligning with another process that's underway, where they are looking at some of the different forest health metrics and how they can better measure forest health and ways to prevent wildfires. And then there are some watershed metrics that we have included related to wetlands and meadows, or stream environment zones, like we like to call them in Tahoe. And we are expecting there to be updates through a threshold update process that we will be aligned with. We want to make sure we're being consistent with those recommendations that are going to be brought about through those other processes. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Another goal is related to promoting resilient built systems. There are several new metrics that are proposed for this, but a lot of these metrics are connected to the existing transportation metrics that are a part of the transportation tracker dashboard. There are some updates that the transportation team is proposing right now, and they are working through, and we are aligned with that process. We're including those updates to different metrics. We proposed another metric related to zero emission transportation infrastructure, related to tracking the coverage of electric vehicle chargers and other, there's also bicycle chargers that could be considered as a part of this. We also looked at including a metric that looks at the vulnerability of different transportation facilities to at least identify where there's vulnerable transportation facilities that are in need of upgrades. We looked at various utility-related metrics that weren't included necessarily in the last dashboard, one of which is looking at the energy mix, showing the amount of renewable energy for the region. And for these utility metrics, we've been contacting NV Energy and Liberty Utilities to find out about data availability, since they have data that might be helpful. So these metrics are expected to be refined some, but we are finding that there is some data available. So it's been kind of a positive response. So go ahead and move on to the next slide. And then we also looked at ways to promote resilient social systems. There are some new metrics proposed related to equity. There was some concern from stakeholders that there's not a lot of information about the community demographics and those who would be at greater risk with the impacts with climate change, and those who would have more difficulty and challenges with evacuating if there was a wildfire or some other type of climate related impact. So there was a need to have more tracking of different community sector metrics and other metrics associated with evacuation. There was also a lot of feedback on us promoting a resilient economy, in particular tourism. So there was various metrics that were proposed about tourism. And one of the areas that we had also pointed out was the need for a commuting metric to understand how many people are working in the basin, but that are commuting to work in the basin. That's an important metric for us to understand those greenhouse gas impacts. And then visitation also was something that was brought up. There are a lot of people visiting the region, and it would be helpful to understand the trends associated with visitation and where people are visiting, and to look into the data availability with that. The data is a little bit more challenging related to visitation. So we are looking at opportunities for getting the best data for this dashboard. And go ahead and go to the next slide. And so essentially that's what where we're at. This is just preliminary findings on our metrics. It's draft metrics. We are expecting to have a narrowed down list of metrics that will be refined and finalized. We also are refining the indicators to make sure that they make sense. And then we are going to head into the next stage where we will add narrative for each of the indicators and start really drafting out the dashboard to get a draft dashboard, and then that'll lead into the phase of getting a final dashboard. We are soliciting feedback. We want to hear from people. We want this to be very user friendly. So it's important for the users to be able to give us feedback throughout this process. We're hoping to do user testing throughout so that we can make sure that we're developing something that will be highly useful. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And as a reminder, we're just in the early stages. We're not expected to have a final dashboard until around February to March of 2024. And with that, we can go ahead and open it up to questions and comments.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Aleka and Jennifer. Devin, did you want to wrap up this discussion before we go to questions? Did you have any?
I was
final
getting
thoughts?
my mic ready, but
Okay.
definitely, as I mentioned, really getting the board's input on how we're organizing the goals, the indicators, and the more detailed draft metrics. There were a lot to fit on the slides are in your packet on this item.
Great, thank you. So we'll go to board member questions or comments. I'll start on my left this time and head to the right. Megan, any? Belinda?
Just one quick one that I really appreciate seeing the social metrics that are in the document, and one at some point, personally just haven't taken the time to look at the details, but I will. And if I have any comments, I'll get back to staff.
Thank you. Mr. Frieder?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair, and real great work, Devin, and the consulting team here. This is heartened to see this happening. Certainly, what is measured matters, right? So, so I think they have good. This is a good initiative and a strong set of initial metrics. I did send Devin, I think, over 25 ideas. I'm not going to read them here, but a lot of them are covered. There's kind of variations on a theme. I think in general, just kind of we had a good our 777 transportation framework, where all local jurisdictions are kind of accountable in a sense to provide our fair share of transit funding. I think that's a good model for this. Is, I know some of the metrics were indicated by jurisdiction, to the extent we can do them all by jurisdiction, so we're all accountable to see how we're doing on these social and energy and other metrics that we've decided here, at least just for challenging ourselves to step up. So in that frame, I'd say I think just making sure that as many metrics as possible, local jurisdictions have some autonomy or control over. So, for example, I would say, like, when we say renewable energy as a share of total energy, I might add just to focus on a jurisdiction basis, like the number of electrification or solar and battery storage or microgrid projects or community resilience centers that are implemented by jurisdiction, because these whereas you can have a percentage of renewable energy provided by the utility that doesn't necessarily provide local resilience the way a battery energy storage system would. And that's how the local jurisdiction has more control over local renewable projects like that. Similarly, for charging stations, maybe, tracking the ones that are at public institutions like municipal buildings, parks, hospitals, and whatnot, just to show that community benefit. On the housing, again, I think it would be helpful to break that down by jurisdiction. You have affordable, achievable, and workforce, but perhaps add as a percentage of total units created. So we're just seeing where housing is being created and where it's not. Then on equity, I think a metric such as trailheads and beaches that are either in walking distance to low income or disadvantaged communities or served by transit, just to show that some of our most valuable public spaces are accessible, and we're taking steps to provide that access, similar to what we discussed earlier, but just looking at to make sure that these places are available to all. So, and the other ones, like I said, I followed up with Devin and look forward to seeing how this develops.
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Friedrich. Appreciate your input in the list you sent over. On our initial review, I had myself and Dan Segan with TRPA look at it, and there's a lot of alignment with what we're already proposing and just how you slice and dice it. And I think the big balance for the overall dashboard is we want to tell that comprehensive climate story without having 150 metrics that we're responsible for tracking. And as we said, really getting to that goal and indicator and avoiding just like, here's a bunch of stuff we're doing, and really getting to where we're trying to go with it. But definitely appreciate your input.
Yep. Understood. Thank you.
Coming back down the table, not seeing any lights on. Yes. Ms. Conrad.
Well, thank you so much. It is hard work, and it's sort of so process oriented, but the end result is that it's a very helpful way for members of the public to understand exactly where public investments are going and where our work is going. So I really appreciate the hard work all of you have done to look into this. And it's tough because all of these indicators are great and helpful, and the metrics are really helpful too. I guess I would sort of dial it up a level when you're thinking about how to distill all of these into, a smaller number of metrics, by thinking about like resilience as how buffered we are to fiscal, economic, environmental stressors. And so which of these metrics help us understand that buffering best, right? How do we, resilience is about how we come out of those stressors. So you can look back at Caldor and COVID and say, okay, how did those stressors impact the community? How did we respond to them? What were the big things that we were responding to? And that might help distill the metrics down to what really is an indicator of that, community social health in the area. And that may or may not help, but I think since we have those two stressors immediately in our rearview mirror, evaluating them with those in mind might help figure out which ones are A, easiest to track, and B, most representative of the resilience of our communities.
That's great framing. I appreciate that comment. As we mentioned, we're looking at roadway corridors and their resilience to landslides and water and wildfire. And we showed the picture of the boulder. So I think that's really getting to those connections. So I do appreciate that framework.
Moving down, Ms. Aldine.
I don't have anything really of a substantive nature to include, but looking at the Tahoe Climate Resiliency Dashboard, the live, work, and play in Tahoe sounds more like a visitor bureau advertisements. We're not promoting that, but so maybe living, working, and playing in Lake Tahoe, and what the expectations are for residents and visitors in terms of reducing emissions, for example. I just think rewording that would be it seems to be a little inconsistent with some of the other elements of the dashboard.
No, comment noted. We can look at that. And that is where we were looking at some of our housing stuff and those metrics. So we can think of a better way to frame that title.
Yes, Beck, Mr. Flanagan.
Sorry about that. Devin, we already have a dashboard online that shows how we're achieving a lot of our goals. I want to understand a little better how that relates to this one. Are they going to look the same? Are they going to is one a subset of the other? Because too many would be too confusing. So just want to see how those relate.
Yeah, absolutely. The existing sustainability dashboard that's on LT Info, once this project is complete, that will go away, that will get deleted, and this will replace it. So that dashboard currently has about 32 metrics that it tracks. There's a handful of those that we are going to continue tracking. There's some that just are no longer relevant. For example, free school lunches, the number of kids receiving free school lunches, that used to be a great metric for measuring equity and our underserved communities, but now everyone's getting free school lunches, at least on the California side. I believe Nevada might have something similar. So it's like, now that everyone's eligible for free school lunches, does having 100% measured in the tracker really tell you anything about the equity concern? So yes, this will replace that existing dashboard, but share some of those metrics. So we're not just scrapping the whole thing and saying, thanks for your service, you're no longer needed. It'll really integrate those two. But on the final dashboard, when you go to the website, there will only be one place to go. So it doesn't have that confusion for the public.
I guess, and that's the dashboard. I'm sorry, I couldn't find it. We're just looking at it. So I can't remember exactly what it's called, but is it that one?
Yeah, it's on the Lake Tahoe Info website. So it's along with, on the homepage, you can click on the EIP project tracker, the thresholds, and right now it says sustainability dashboard. That will get changed to climate resilience dashboard.
Okay, so one section of it is being replaced?
Yeah, so one section of
Okay,
LT Info
good.
will be replaced.
Perfect, thanks.
Looking down, Ms. Lane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Middlebrook, this is just a really good snapshot of what you're working on, and I fully support it. One number that always seems to get lost for me is the RENA numbers. You know, those come out from the state and everyone looks at them and goes, oh God, we'll never get there. And then we never look at it again until a new set of RENA numbers come out. And this might not be the right place, but you did mention the word goals in your summary comments, and those are goals. So I thought, I don't know if they have a place or if they don't, but it just crossed my mind that this might be an opportunity to keep them in front of everybody and remind them.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the proposed metrics is the total number of affordable, moderate and achievable housing that is available, and that directly relates to those RENA numbers. Our RENA numbers are a little bit different than statewide because we do have our growth caps in place. So the state does recognize our unique situation at Tahoe when setting our local RENA numbers. And then obviously we don't have those on the Nevada side, but I do think that's a good point to bring into the narrative around those dashboards, is making sure we're tracking that. And I believe we also do have some of that tracking within other parts of Lake Tahoe Info as we're tracking allocations and how they're being used.
Any others from the board? Anybody online? Wes or Alexis? Okay, were you
It only
indicating?
muddied the waters.
Okay, okay, thank you. All right, then we'll look for public comment on this item. Are there any members of the public here in the room or online? Please raise your hand here and come to the podium, or I'm not seeing anyone jump up. So we'll go online and see if there's any hands raised online.
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised online.
Okay, then we'll close the public comment on that. Are there any other final comments from the board? Not seeing any, so this was not an action item. We don't need a vote, so we will move on in our agenda. Devin, thank you. Aleka and Jennifer, thank you very much, and look forward to the final product.
Thank you all.
Forward. Yes. We'll move then to item 6C, updating to the 2018 Linking Tahoe Active Transportation Plan. Information on this item can be found on page 289. And as a reminder to the public, after the staff presentation and board discussion, you may raise your hand and we will call on you for public comment. So I am moving on to Ryan Murray.
Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you for having me today. My name is Ryan Murray. I'm a transportation planner with the TRPA. And I'm here today to give you an update to our ongoing planning process to the existing active transportation plan. Just to kind of center the presentation, by active transportation, I mean walking, biking, rolling. Rolling could include scootering, one wheels, a host of other devices. And that's kind of what I mean by active transportation today. So a quick outline of the presentation I'll be delivering. I'm going to give you some background on the plan. Going to highlight some of Keeping Tahoe Moving, which is a strategic initiative. Going to go over the plan overview and the process that's underway. I'm going to dive into a little bit of a modern transportation planning, highlighting the levels of traffic stress and pedestrian environment index, as well as give you some of the regional coordination that's underway, and then the next steps of the process. Next slide, please. So a background to the plan, the last comprehensive update was in 2016. By comprehensive update, I mean a robust public outreach, detailed planning efforts, a lot of data analysis, a lot of effort goes into these plan updates. The plan was technically amended in October of 2018. Technical amendment is a lighter touch of a plan update. We kind of go through, take out projects that have been updated, update some of the maps, incorporate any new transportation elements that have come out in the years since the comprehensive update. And currently, staff, we are underway on another comprehensive update. Something I want to add to that is, as a part of that comprehensive update, the active transportation plan is preceding the regional transportation plan update. And so the updates that are included in this will be folded into that upcoming regional transportation plan that's more comprehensive of all modes of transportation. Next slide, please. So Keeping Tahoe Moving and ATP's vision. Keeping Tahoe Moving is a strategic initiative of the TRPA. It's the transportation component. And active transportation is a critical component of that. What we're looking to incorporate into both of these structures is new shared use paths, recommendations on sidewalks and on-street bicycle facilities, connection to regional transit, recreation, and regional destinations. What I wanted to mention here is a part of the existing active transportation plan are the recreational trails that exist. Just last month, Kira got your endorsement on the most recent trail strategy. And so we're separating the dirt trails, more of a recreational component, from the active transportation plan, and just focusing solely on the transportation element of active transportation. As a component of that, we do want to focus on connecting folks via active transportation to those trailheads. So that's the nexus between more of an active transportation and trail networks as a recreation component. And then, of course, a major component of the plan are the complete streets improvements. What I mean by complete streets is more than just curb to curb repaving the roadway. It's looking at the street as a more comprehensive update as far as stormwater improvements, pedestrian facilities. We're not, when you go in there to dig, how can we improve the utility undergrounding? I've heard a lot of talk about electric vehicle charging. So how can we install that infrastructure when we already have the roadway torn up for a repave project? So as a part of those complete streets improvements is providing those alternative transportation options for residents and visitors. Through that, we're seeking to alleviate traffic and reduce GHGs, which again is speaking to those environmental thresholds and part of that Keeping Tahoe Moving vision. And of course, the end result of all this is to provide a world-class transportation network for all of Tahoe. Next slide, please. So just some examples of some projects that were identified in the existing active transportation plan and how that all folds into our environmental improvement program at the TRPA. You had the Lake Tahoe Boulevard Class 1 bike trail. This is a shared use path. It incorporated pedestrian lighting, ADA, Americans with Disability Act, ADA upgrades, and it was completed this year in 2023. We had the Sierra Boulevard Complete Streets project, which were bicycle lanes, sidewalks, and then you had that complete streets item I referenced earlier with the stormwater improvements. And then, of course, the Dollar Creek Shared Use Trail. Now, all of these are just a snippet of the projects that are identified in the existing active transportation plan. And then this is just to highlight how those identified projects then get built in the real world and why it's important to identify those things. Another component, more than just identifying of projects, is identifying of certain policies. The active transportation plan has the ability to shape policies and goals as far as what types of projects we want to see built. And then it even gets down into some nitty-gritty details like we've seen a lot, I'll get into this a little bit later, but we see a lot more increase in like the scooters or the electric bicycles on the shared use paths. So going from like what used to be an 8-foot standard into maybe a 10 or 12-foot width standard to accommodate more social cycling or faster moving devices like the e-bikes, more space for pedestrians, how to stripe these things. These all have policy implications, and then how projects can be implemented by our partners down the road. Next slide, please. So a little overview of the planning process. Currently, we're underway on the existing conditions and needs analysis. That's exactly as it sounds. We take a look at the existing conditions and then identify the needs from there. From that, we go into network recommendations. Where are the gaps in our network? How can we make it more comprehensive, more connected? Where are the alignments and the places people want to go? The implementation plan, how are these projects rolled out and implemented, or how will they be rolled out and implemented? The priority project list, which I just referenced on that previous slide, how we identify those projects, and then how those projects then end up getting built in the future. Of course, public outreach, which I have a slide later on I'll go into, but that's been well underway. And then as a part of that public outreach, we have a transportation safety survey that's currently active. The bolded items of these bullets here are sort of newer components to the plan. We're incorporating a more comprehensive set of accessibility needs, how to make a Tahoe more accessible. I'll go into this soon. Here is the bicycle levels of traffic stress analysis and the pedestrian experience index. And then, of course, electric bicycle policy recommendation. Now, from this, it's more than just electric bicycles. As I mentioned earlier, we have scooters, those one-wheel devices, other unknown electric devices that have we've seen out there. So, you know, we support electric bicycling as a mode of transportation with Tahoe's topography and distance between destinations. It's a really amazing tool to get people out and out of their vehicles, but we are sensitive to the safety concerns that folks have, especially, you know, pedestrians or, you know, dog walkers, people like that. So we want to make sure that we're both supporting alternative modes of transportation, but in a manner that's safe and effective for all users of our trail network. Next slide, please. So the bicycle levels of traffic stress and pedestrian environment index. This slide kind of shows a little snippet of a map that highlights this. What I mean by levels of traffic stress is how stressful is the roadway for a bicycle rider. It's generally quantified on a scale of 1 through 4. We have 4.5 to highlight some very troublesome areas. And so the idea and thinking behind it, this does both road segments and intersections. So you see those points are intersections, and then the segments or lines are the roadway segments. And so what we're trying, you can go on to the next slide for me. And so what we're trying to do when we talk about levels of traffic stress for cyclists specifically is by reducing the stress the cyclist is experiencing, you then gain more people who will choose to cycle as a mode of transportation. I really like this graphic because it'll show you for a level of traffic stress 4, which is the highest stress designation, you can see the roadway there has, you know, 4 lanes with a center turn lane. The cyclist is sharing the road with the vehicles. And then that cyclist there is in a more aggressive stance. Perhaps they're a more confident cyclist. As you move further to the right, the road stress characteristics get less stressful. And then you have more opportunity for a wider range of people who are maybe less, you know, what we call strong and fearless or enthused and confident. Maybe they're interested but concerned. And then they just want that protective facility to help spur them to get onto a cycle as a mode of transportation. And then finally, that level of traffic stress 1 as that, I like that they use green there in that graphic, because then that gets at the, you know, you have the opportunity for landscaping and stormwater infrastructure and pedestrian infrastructure, and that kind of makes the lowest stress facility, and that's safe for all users where you have the kids there on bicycles and things like that. Go on to the next slide for me. So this is just another graphic to highlight the same thing I just described. Over on the left, you have the higher stress roads. So those are shared. They have the sharrows in the road there, where it's a shared travel lane, maybe even just a painted bicycle lane adjacent a busy street is higher stress. And then as you move over towards the right, you have your protected bike lanes and off-street pathways. These are not always hard and fast examples. Tahoe is its own, every region is its own place, and you cater these needs to the region. And so this is just to be an example, but it does, I think, highlight what we're talking about when we want different levels of comfort for cyclists as juxtaposed against the stress of the existing roadway. An important thing I want to mention about more than just knowing this, we have this map and it tells us the stress levels. And so that's awesome to know from a planning perspective. But what this also does for our regional partners is when applying for grant applications, we have identified levels of stress, and then part of the plan update will identify countermeasures on what you can do to reduce that stress. So exactly what we're seeing on this slide here. If it's a painted bicycle lane and somehow we can implement a protected bike lane there in the future, that lowers the stress of the roadway. And then that is more competitive in your grant application for when you're trying to identify why this project is important. Next slide, please. So this is a list of the stakeholders that we've engaged on this current plan process. Last week, we held our third technical advisory committee meeting where we go over the things I'm going over with you all now, and then they provide us feedback on how this is actually going to work or what could work best for their respective jurisdiction. So it's comprehensive. I really appreciate all the local knowledge that all these folks bring to the table, and it's ongoing. So I'll get more into that in a minute, but that's what this slide is to highlight. Next slide, please. So building off of the engagement with our technical advisory committee is the public outreach. Outreach was kicked off in April with North and South Shore Earth Day celebrations. These are largely in person, as you can see by this photo. We're at a Tahoe City Farmers Market. We've held outreaches at numerous farmers markets. We have those maps there. You can see we're asking folks in person about what they think about the active transportation network, what could be better, what do they like about it, what don't they like about it. And we're also soliciting our transportation survey at these outreach events. We've done outreach at the Family Resource Center as well as the Sierra Community House. This is targeted outreach to those communities, as well as the Tamba Mountain Bike Festival. Some perhaps more, well, these are all fun to me, but the Music on the Beach and the Live at Lakeview have been exciting outreach events to go to and capture those communities there. And then, of course, I want to highlight the really successful Bike Month we had this June. It was one of the best attended and best highest registrants of bike months that we've had to date. This includes things like what we call bike kitchens put on by the Bike Coalition and TRPA, where we help do tune-ups on bikes. So when people come in, I'm asking them the same questions with these maps here. We have Safe Routes to School events where we're educating students on safe cycling and speaking to parents and teachers and working with them on how they think we can best get children to school safely. So all of these have been enjoyable events. We've learned a lot of really important feedback from the community at these, and they're ongoing currently, likely wrapping up towards the end of September here. Next slide, please. So where are we in the plan? The plan kicked off this year, January 2023. We've been underway on all the planning processes I've identified so far in this presentation, and find myself at governing board update, seeking your feedback here in August of 2023. After today, we're going to finalize the data analysis and outreach over the fall. Come back in January of 2024 for a public draft circulation. This will give you all and members of the public a chance to comment on all the items that I've discussed here. And then back in March of 2024 for potential adoption from the governing board. Next slide, please. That's all I have for you today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yes, Vince. Mr.
Ryan, thanks so much for the presentation. I'm really glad we're working on this. One of the things that we're working on that we're presenting next month is the changing development standards in our town centers. And one of the aspects of that is really reducing the parking requirement, which requires that we have better modes of active transportation. The theory is if it's in a town, people can walk, they can bike, they can scoot, they can one wheel, and perhaps catch transit to their job or someplace farther away. And that also requires that it's year round. They have good access. And I know typically we've had a lot of problems with keeping the trails open and the paths and the sidewalks open in winter. Are you looking into that and the funding methods and things to keep all the trails open all season? Just wanted to get an idea of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Yes, in answer to your question, yes, we are looking to identify both from a maintenance and operations perspective, how can we keep those trails open? Even is down into what devices, what vehicles, snow clearing devices do other agencies use to, for clearing a shared use trail or a sidewalk. It's a much smaller vehicle than a plow or for a blower for the roadway. So these vehicles exist. So we're looking to identify a list of those, and then of course potential ways to store snow and move it in ways that both keep your network viable for that entire winter season. And so when, I bring up things like protected bike lanes, or in the picture on the screen right now, there's those what's called pedestrian bulb outs. These are all challenging for snow removal maintenance operations. So as I've been going through these, it's been a really interesting and fun challenge to sort of think about how we can something like a protected bike lane, which is a vertical element in the roadway that separates the cyclists from the road. How does that work in a snow removal operations situation? Much more difficult than in a place that doesn't receive snow. So yes, we are looking at different ways that can be implemented. And then of course, the potential funding sources to sustain that for our local agencies.
Other comments, questions? Yes, Ms. Aldine?
Good presentation, Ryan. You've done this a time or two before, although I think this is the first time I've seen you present. So looking at the list of people or organizations that are involved with the Technical Advisory Committee, I noticed there are no running clubs. Obviously, pedestrian use is important and should be accommodated. And I'm wondering why running clubs, if they exist in the Tahoe Basin, why they haven't been included in the conversation.
Thank you for that. No particular reason. I could certainly go back, and there are folks on that list that we've engaged as a technical committee, and then others that we've engaged like separate on top of that. So I can certainly go back and try to identify some running clubs or orgs and reach them separately and hear what they, feedback that they'd like to give on this.
That would be great, because I suspect, and my next question was, who is kind of collecting data on user conflicts, especially on, for example, the East Shore shared use pathway. I've heard that there are conflicts between pedestrians and bicyclists. I'm still having to pull out into traffic to avoid the more aggressive cyclists on 28, talking about something that's dangerous. When a bicyclist insists on not using the shared use pathway, but using the roadway where it's clearly presents a danger not only to themselves, but to the people who have to pass them and try to maintain a 3-foot separation, which is almost impossible on 28. I would like to see the data on user conflicts so that we can address those user conflicts.
Yeah.
So,
no, please continue.
No, that's it. That's it.
I just, to respond to that, through that technical advisory committee, I learned specifically of those conflicts on the shared use trail along along the West Shore that you're describing specifically. So that's been really helpful as a part of how I'm getting that feedback. And then as a part of our planning process, we are looking to identify from a larger perspective, this would be state agencies, on how that data is then collected and reported. A lot of our crash network data is reported on the roadway only. So it was just brought up at the last TAC, how do we get collisions that happen on a class 1 trail versus a collision that happens on 28. So that's underway, and that's helpful. Thank you.
Yes, Secretary.
As somebody who rides their bike on the road rather than the bike path, what are we doing from a safety perspective with e-bikes? Because they go at a different rate of speed and they're heavier than most bikes. What are some of the safety considerations you're thinking about?
So right now, we are looking to, there's the complexity between this are the different regulations between different jurisdictions. And so developing in my mind, I'd like this to be a one pager, but it's so complex, it might be greater than 1 pages. But firstly, I think public education, understanding what classes of e-bikes are allowed on what trails or what areas of Tahoe or on the road network. I know that there's a lot of messaging campaigns going on right now. Looking on the, share the trail, pedestrians stay to one side. And again, like policy recommendations, when you look at the shared use trail, generally it's just a solid asphalt trail, but you can stripe a center line, and that gives two-way cyclists an understanding of where they're supposed to be, or you can stripe a pedestrian zone, again, widening it so you have more space for those people. Part of the running club folks that I understand is like that decomposed granite on the side for the soft running surface. So providing enough space for all these users would be the first step. And then kind of working not only with our agency partners, but also with local bike shops. I notice a lot of folks, some of these electric devices are borderline electric motorbikes. So understanding that, hey, what you're renting or what you're selling might not be legal on Class 1 trails, or currently legal, or everything's kind of a gray area, especially as new devices get invented and brought to market. So for me, it's more so coordinating with those private sellers and letting them know, like, hey, these are the things we're trying to put out as far as increasing safety. I know that TAMBA has recently put out one of these pagers as far as like Class 1 e-bikes can go here, Class 2 e-bikes can go here, and so kind of raising that public education and trying to get folks to understand what is allowed and where would be a helpful first step. And then from there, for me, it's a infrastructure standpoint. How do we design the facility to achieve safety rather than relying on things like enforcement? I don't know if our enforcement bodies have enough time to be all over the Class 1, the shared use trails to be enforcing these things. But I do know through a lot of the educational campaigns, like little signs on the trail, the Tahoe Fund with Take Care Tahoe has been working on gentle recommendations that kind of help folks understand how they're supposed to use the trail and be sensitive to that.
Are there speed limitations on the e-bikes on some of these
For how they're classified as Class 1, 2, and 3, and this is mostly, I'm still working on getting how this all works between state to state, but there are speed limitations based on the class of e-bike, and then there are technical limitations on what's allowed on a Class 1 trail. So 20 miles per hour is that limit for Class 2 e-bikes. After that, you go to Class 3, and then you go over 20, and then those aren't allowed on the shared use trails.
Because I think PI lawyers will kind of set the standard with this if there's not going to be legal enforcement.
Right. And just to complicate things, our topography, as you're going downhill, that also plays a role, and you can easily hit over 20 miles per hour on I call them acoustic bicycles. So again, designing the facility is more so how I would try to achieve these things rather than a speed limit sign, let's say.
But a speed limit sign would give somebody a cause of action to hold somebody accountable.
Very helpful. Yes.
Bad behavior.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thanks so much. This was really interesting. And I like the biking stress level. I think all of us who are bikers feel that, right? Like where our level decreases over time. So it's useful to have a metric on that. With the biking stress level, I think I understood you saying that there would be mapping for the region that shows that the stress level changing over the region. Is there, when I think about myself as a biker, I always route myself off of artery roads or off of those shared lane roads and often onto roads with trees. In Sacramento, having trees overhead is a benefit when you're biking around. Are there ways of showing those sort of topography or other, street benefits that might make artery roads more attractive than the sort of fast moving roads throughout the region?
Thank you for that. Yeah, yes, I believe so. And so what I think you're quantifying is you have your main arterial, and then usually there's an adjacent parallel side street that is kind of like your what's considered a bicycle boulevard network. And again, what you're going for there is exactly as you described. You're taking the higher stress, you're getting off the higher stress facility and using the lower stress facility. As far as quantifying something like tree coverage, I can certainly look into the other data that TRPA and our partners have to perhaps supplement the level of traffic stress analysis and see if tree coverage is something that could potentially be a part of that quantification analysis. That's an interesting one. I hadn't thought. I mean, it's a great thought because, as you said, like shading yourself is as you're exercising is a helpful way to stay cool while you ride. But mitigating that against like certain other complexities like sightline issues, and trees can create other less desirable things for cyclists and pedestrians. But by and large, yeah, I think that's a great thought, and I'll look into that.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but just like this tends to be a greener bikeway road versus this one that's super open and exposed, something like that, just a sliding scale or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other board member questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Friedrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks. Great presentation, Ryan. And I see a number of high stress bike riders in the back of the room, Gavin, Devin, Karen, highest stress rider of all. But to avoid that high stress, I think there's some good examples provided of those user conflicts. Another one, certainly South Shore down near State Line, the shared use path, where you have 6 feet of pavement and every kind of user, wheelchairs, scooters, e-bikes, people walking on all sides of the trail, and it's a mess. And then you have 60 feet of highway next to it. And so you were saying one possible solution that you're looking at is to expand shared use paths. Of course, that requires more coverage, and that's a long process. A shorter path would be to de-stress the road and have a road diet or wider lane, right, or in the protective barriers. So to the extent that these are issues throughout the basin, and often will be led by the local jurisdiction in coordination with Caltrans or NDOT, for example, how do you see that kind of this plan working with those efforts, informing them, partnering with them? So in other words, kind of what do you see as the role of the TRPA and the governing board vis-a-vis some of these local efforts to look at either wider shared use paths or road de-stressing features with barriers and road diets or whatever?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm glad you brought that up. So beyond the class 1 path widening recommendations is exactly that. Class 1 paths are a great use of a low stress facility, but they're generally supposed to be implemented in locations where the roadway network doesn't already take you there. And so the more ideal a way to move forward as far as from an active transportation component goes is to do exactly as you described, is to de-stress the roadway, put the safe, low stress facility on the roadway network. Because when we're talking in terms of transportation, the roads go to where the places people want to go to. So it's already a turnkey network for you to utilize as far as getting folks to where they'd like to be. So again, kind of going back to the active transportation plan being more than this document of like curbs and bike lanes is also those policy recommendations. So those policy recommendations on when you implement a project, have you looked into the feasibility of a protected bike lane as opposed to just an adjacent running class 1 shared use facility? Kind of a thing to navigate with that is that's awesome for the bike lane feature, but is there an adjacent sidewalk that the pedestrians can use? Because that's an amenity with the class 1 trails, is it's generally shared use. So again, I think framing these policies in a way that prioritizes, again, what then feeds into our priority project list. So have you looked into the feasibility of adding low stress bicycle facilities on the existing network, on the existing roadway network? Through that, we've identified a tiered priority projects that do just that. And then those things, as I mentioned earlier, get rolled into the regional transportation plan that then get the opportunities for funding, whether it's through our regional grant program, or again, as our partners go to apply for whether it's state or federal grants, they can say these were identified in the TRPA's priority project list, and it's a level of traffic stress 4, and we're reducing it to a level of traffic stress 2. You can build that narrative around how you're supporting walking and biking. And that's where I think the value is found with our local agencies.
Great, thank you. Look forward to exploring all that with you.
I had a follow-up on that one. On policy recommendations, will you also be making recommendations on transit vehicles having bike racks and assisting those who live further up the hill who maybe can't afford an e-bike or so they can access more of the facilities that are built in our around the lake and the perimeter of the lake.
Yes, thank you for that question. Absolutely. I can't recall if I touched upon it or if I glossed right over it, but absolutely the connections for active transportation to transit. And then again, making it feasible for folks. It's one thing if you ride your bike to the bus stop and then the bus doesn't have the appropriate rack or the appropriate facilities for you to get on the bus. So that's definitely something we're looking into through this plan. And then as well as something I don't think I mentioned that I know that Devin did in his previous presentation is the electric bicycle charging stations. Not only the charging stations for electric bicycles, but perhaps bicycle rack design standards for cargo bikes, e-bikes, things that are a little bit bigger and differently shaped than your traditional bicycle. So we're looking into all those things that, again, kind of complete that more holistic transportation network so folks can move about more efficiently.
Great, thank you. Not seeing other comments or questions from the governing board members, so I'll open up public comment on this item. Are there any members of the public here in the room or on Zoom? If so, raise your hand, either on Zoom or in the room. Lots of people are ready for lunch and a tour, I can see, so not seeing any in the room.
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised online to comment on this item.
Okay. So any final comments from the board? Ryan? Yes, Julie, go ahead.
If I may, Madam Chair, Julie Reagan, TRPA Executive Director. Just to build on a couple of Ryan's excellent points and answering some questions. To Member Friedrich's question around where does our role, intersect with local jurisdictions. Another great example of that, in addition to what Ryan talked about, was the environmental improvement program and the transportation action plan. And so all the materials that we handed out at the Tahoe summit that list in the transportation world, trails, transit, technology, and our role is very often to convene that partnership to go out and find those dollars, because we're talking, hundreds of millions of dollars. And so that's a leadership role this board can play. And really even going back to 20 years ago when we started with something called the Lake Lapper program. John Marshall, to my right, participated that as an early cyclist of a challenge for TRPA staffers, Paul Nielsen, John Hitchcock, who's now with the city, and a former staffer, Matt Graham, who left us, started this challenge of cycling around the lake in different stages. And we raised money for our very first environmental scholarship, which you're going to hear about in my report briefly. And so just the leadership to elevate the issues around cycling, and then that spawned the beginning of Bike Month and getting the Bike Coalition and the whole community engaged. And then that rolled right into the update of the regional plan to make Lake Tahoe more bikeable and walkable, to support our mission in the compact and the policy directive to reduce dependency on the private automobile. So it really does connect a lot. And just in my tenure at the agency, it's just incredible to see how much more sophisticated that we've gotten. And Shelley is right. The board has not seen Ryan Murray before in this format. This is his first board presentation. So I think he did incredibly well. And ironically, Ryan is from the Motor City, Detroit, and he's built his career on supporting more bike and pedestrian infrastructure. So we're delighted to have him about a year now at TRPA. So I think a lot of those connections are really important to highlight. And then to Secretary Aguilar's question about safety and e-bikes, just how personally important this is in our community. One of the talks that I did in the community in terms of my role of new executive directorship centered a lot around trails. And a woman had been hit by an e-bike and was there, and it was really emotional to hear her story. And so these are emerging challenges that we are working through in real time. I see Eric Walker is still here from the U.S. Forest Service, and the Forest Service is working through a lot of these issues of better communication, better management of identifying where e-bikes can be and can't be, and the technology is changing like all the time. So it's an emerging area, but it's something we're really hyper-focused on. So just really appreciate the great engagement of the board on this, and Ryan did a great job.
Thanks, Julie. And with that, no further comments. So we'll close this item. This was informational only. Ryan, excellent job. Appreciate it. And we'll move on to reports. We'll start with Julie Reagan for the Executive Director Status Report.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Julie Reagan, Executive Director. I understand I'm standing between us and lunch, so I will try to be as brief as I can, but there are a couple of highlights I wanted to make, and also to thank the members of the audience who have been patient. We're pretty close to on time of what we were targeting for the tour. We are going to break for lunch and then come back to kick off the tour. So really appreciate all the discussions. And the first item I'll mention it for my ED report is just in your packet, page 291, the Tahoe in brief, and a couple of topics coming up for future board meetings, looking at our statistics. You'll notice what's different in this month's report is that we've taken our 6 strategic initiatives down to the 3 strategic priorities that you adopted as part of the work plan and budget last month. So we'll be reframing that report to really dig into those 3 strategic priority areas going forward. And more to come on that. We will, for the October board meeting, work in some additional strategic planning. So we had initially thought of having a separate day of a retreat, and just in the members I've talked to, having a 2-day meeting in October just may not be possible. So we're going to try to have the morning be regular business and then take the afternoon to do additional strategic planning, like check in on the priorities, check in on things like committee assignments and how we can streamline committees. We are almost at a full complement of the board with Megan Hayes joining us. And I'm told soon, imminently, in the next month or so, we'll have Bill Yates's replacement, which would be exciting, coming from the Senate Rules Committee in the state of California. And so hopefully by October, we'll have our 15 members strong. So keep that in mind, and we're still working out the details. I must say a huge thank you to the team that did this remote meeting for us here. It is great to be back in Placer County, Madam Chair, and Kings Beach. We used to be in this facility a lot before COVID. This is the first board meeting we've had off-site since COVID. So it was a huge feat. We had to get new equipment. So really just a huge thanks to the whole team that you see here, and Steve and Lance and our consultants, and everyone did a great job to make this happen. So wanted to say thank you for that, and then move into the summit debrief. Just a couple of slides, because we were just here, those of us who were in person. Some of you streamed the meeting of the 27th annual summit, which was amazing. Tahoe, it's Tahoe's day to shine when we have our annual summit, and it's just an absolute miracle that we've been able to do this since 1997 to celebrate the accomplishments that we've made. And for those of you who were not in person and don't have the EIP accomplishments report that we produce in partnership with all of the Environmental Improvement Program partners, please take a look at it, because we get very focused on the problems we need to solve, but we don't want to lose sight of what we have accomplished. And one of the stats in here right up front, since the EIP was launched with President Clinton's first presidential summit, on the invite, or on the left page here, almost 200 miles of paths and bike trails and pedestrian paths since the EIP began, and a lot more to do, but don't want to lose sight of that. So I will take the next slide, please. So just how incredible it was that we got to have not only our full Senate delegation, governors, we had Senator Alex Padilla from California hosting this year, and then we had the speaker. Our keynote speaker was Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, the first woman Speaker of the House. So that was a great honor. And so you can see a gathering of some of the key speakers there, the chair of the Washoe Tribe, Sorrel Smokey. And then it's just, I was thinking back of how intense this period is, like July leading into August. For our team, for Team TRPA, it's incredibly demanding. It's kind of akin to being like, think of the demands of like any election campaign. The week or two before, you're bonkers, and it really kind of feels like that. So it's a huge shout out to Kim Chevalier and our great staff who help support the large partnership effort around the summit. And it's something that TRPA has done since the very first one, which was amazing. So I'll take the next slide. So a big highlight, of course, was our board chair, Cindy Gustafson, being on the podium and giving incredible remarks, and a huge shout out to the board, to the staff. I know the staff really appreciated that, Madam Chair, to recognize all the work that we all do collectively to support this partnership and to be really a backbone entity in this partnership, which is coming up, more than 80 organizations strong. And then we got, of course, to meet the speaker, and that was a real thrill. She was delightful and her remarks were incredible. Take the next slide. One thing that we did differently this year that I wanted to call your attention to, we generally combine some kind of legislative outreach with key staffers that come to the summit. We do an online virtual briefing in June or July to get folks ready for the summit as they prepare briefing materials for their members. But we took it to a new level this year. And so our board chair Gustafson kicked us off there in Tahoe City at the Transit Center on the picture to the far left. And then Kim Chevalier and a huge array of partners and our staff had, I think, upwards of 30 members, staff members from both states. And what was incredible this year, because the summit was a couple weeks earlier in the Senate recess calendar than usual, we actually got a lot of participation from our California staff members that generally can't make it to the summit because it coincides with the session kicking back off in August. So we actually had a lot of at the member level from California State Legislature, the Nevada State Legislature, staff members in both states, and our federal staff members that were here for the summit. And it was just an incredible day. Went around the West Shore, all the way from Tahoe City to Emerald Bay and back. And you can just see a couple of pictures here that were just fantastic, of focusing on forest health and wildfire risk, to the Meeks Bay restoration, to sustainable rec and transportation, and all things in between. One thing that did happen since the summit that I wanted to point out, of like why the summit works, Congressman Kevin Kiley, who's our new member of Congress representing the California side of the lake, has signed on to the Lake Tahoe Restoration Act as a co-sponsor immediately following his participation in the summit. And he's our new member. He just not officially come on board the bill, and we need to get the extension of the act another 10 years to keep the restoration programs going and funded in the Congress. So that just happened yesterday in a pro forma session of the House. So that was a great follow-up deliverable of the summit. And then we want to keep the pressure on to keep the federal share of the EIP coming. So I'll take the next slide, just a couple more. Love this picture. This is a picture with Congressman Mark Amodei, the Nevada side of the House representative. And I want to really thank the Forest Service for inviting TRPA. Director Settlemyre participated with other members and stakeholders and local partners from both states in a briefing in the morning, 2 days after the summit, with a key congressional staffer who staffs the House Appropriations Committee. And works for the chair from Idaho, Congressman Simpson, Courtney Stevens. She came and we had a full briefing for her in the morning. And then we went out and Congressman Amodei joined to see this very famous tree that he's been talking to me about for 10 years. Like, where's the biggest tree in the basin? Because it's kind of a secret. And, we ended up getting, thanks to the Forest Service, out in the woods to see this gigantic tree, which is about 90 inches around. It's incredible. So, and of course, Congressman Amodei has been very key to our appropriations on the Restoration Act. So just keep going. And just a couple more things I wanted to highlight before we break. As I mentioned, the TRPA talks have been going incredibly well. We are now finished up with 4 2 morning and 2 after work sessions. The picture here is from the first session where we hosted at the TRPA office. It's just been incredible for me as the new director to meet with the community. About 60 folks have come out. We've tried to keep them at a size where we can be conversational so that everyone gets the chance to ask a question. And not surprising, the themes are exactly what we've been talking about. And they really do mirror the strategic priorities that you as the board have laid out in terms of housing and community revitalization, transportation and responsible tourism and recreation, and certainly the EIP continued investment in climate resiliency, trails, and all the things that we've talked about with the EIP, among others. So just a great show of support, and there's more interest. So I think we're going to try to keep them going because we had more people that wanted to do it. So we'll keep that happening. And the next slide. Big shout out to our interns. We have 3 incredible interns that we're very proud to have worked with this summer. They're going back to college. Well, Miles has already graduated, but Darby and Spencer are going back to school. Sometimes interns, make you do a lot of work as the staff. These were not the case. They did all the work and we just let them go, and they were a huge value add to this agency. So Miles, Darby, and Spencer, if you're listening, thank you. We valued your expertise and you were invaluable. And it also is very important to note that we stay in touch with our interns and they grow careers in TRPA. So people like Jeff Cowan, Katie Waldy, Devin Middlebrook all started in our intern program. So it's an actual pipeline for us to develop talent. And then we'll take the next slide. A couple of neat things that happened also since I saw you last. The groundbreaking happened the day before the summit at the Lake Tahoe Community College. Of course, you approved the 100-bed student housing project, and it was very exciting to celebrate that at the college. They're getting going on that dorm project, will help relieve some pressure on housing on the South Shore. And then the Clean Up the Lake Environmental Dive Center opening just last week in Incline Village. So we participated in that. On the next slide. In addition to all the summit activities, for those who couldn't make it to the summit, Devin Middlebrook, our government affairs manager, has been really busy taking other folks out. So we had reps from the Nevada Division of Outdoor Recreation and the Legislative Council Bureau in Nevada on a boat tour and a tour of the event center, which is there. You can keep going. Like lunch is happening. We got to move this along. Thank you, Tracy. And we were delighted to get a wonderful proclamation from Douglas County, really recognizing the beach cleanup, and they're sharing that recognition with the Tahoe Blue Crew of the League to Save Lake Tahoe. And so we were very pleased to get that recognition. Absolutely. I will say there are a couple other key projects that have come up: Homewood, the Event Center, Waldorf Astoria. Things are moving along. If anybody has very specific questions, feel free to contact me or to email, and I'll be happy to come back. And in the interest of time, I'll move on. But anyone who has any questions about key big projects, let me know. And I will turn it over for a couple of quick words from Victoria on the Environmental Scholarship Program.
Let's try that. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Victoria Ortiz, Community Engagement Manager with TRPA. And I know that right before lunch is not the best time to do an ask for funding, but here I am because I'm really excited to share with you a little bit about our environmental scholarship recipients this year. So for those who may not be aware, TRPA sponsors an environmental scholarship every year for local high school students. And it's one of several ways that we support the next generation of those interested in understanding and connecting their lives and potential livelihoods to the environment that supports us. You got the next slide. Thank you. So TRPA, and specifically Julie Reagan, created the Environmental Scholarship Fund in 2004, as she mentioned. It's also called the Lake Lapper Scholarship. And it awards these scholarships to Lake Tahoe seniors who are pursuing environmental careers. And since its inception, 29 students have been awarded a total of almost $14,000. And this year, scholarships were granted based on academic and extracurricular merit and the desire to pursue a career in the environmental fields. Next slide. So this year, 2 impressive students were each awarded $1,000 scholarships: Evelyn Bennett from South Tahoe High School and Kai Davey from North Tahoe High School. And Evelyn has volunteered with Lake Tahoe Wildlife Care since she was 9 years old. She was an all-star student and athlete and has also carved out time to serve as a student advisory member for the Lake Tahoe Unified School District and assisted the local climate crew. And this young woman's ability to balance a job, athletics, lots of volunteer activities, while also keeping I think now they're up to like 4.8 GPA. It's insane. Has shown her capacity to excel while juggling multiple obligations. And she is going to become a fellow Bruin this fall and will be studying bioengineering with a minor in bioinformatics. Kai Davey of North Tahoe High School is going to be studying biology at UC Berkeley. And at such a young age, he has already put a lot of us to shame. He has dedicated his intellectual pursuits with such passion and original research. So his love for and fascination with mycology really inspired the selection committee, which was comprised of TRPA staff this year. And we were still reminiscing on his applications even days after reviewing it. He serves as a biology tutor and a clean up the lake volunteer, kept up a 3.9 unweighted GPA, and we're really delighted to support him in his educational pursuits. Next slide. So as I mentioned, funding for this scholarship comes from generous TRPA governing board members. I know many of you have donated in the past, so thank you very much for that, as well as advisory planning commission members and staff contributions. And in the last few years, we've received record donations, so we're hoping to keep that trend going. And if you are inspired to contribute, you can write a check made out to TRPA with a memo for the environmental scholarship by the next September board meeting. And you can also mail that to the office to the attention of myself or Maria. So thank you very much for your attention. Hopefully that wasn't too painful right before lunch, and happy to take any questions.
And Madam Chair, I will invite our tour guide coordinators that are helping us in terms of our partners to lunch with us as well. And just another huge thank you to this board. You are a volunteer board. I think our chair did a great job at the summit, indicating that our community sometimes doesn't realize the demands on your time. And we're just grateful that you were able to have this time with us to get outside and walk and talk. I would recommend maybe a 2 o'clock start for the tour. That way we can all have lunch. And then we'll meet right back in this room after lunch. The lunch is right across the hall to the right here. And we'll get the tour going after that. So thank you, Madam Chair and the board.
So I'm assuming that our general counsel has no report today.
Well, no report.
Thank you. And then thank you very much, Julie. We'll go to any governing member board reports. Okay. And then anything from our committees that we need to report out? Not seeing any. Okay, then we'll turn to our final public comment period. This is an opportunity for any member of the public wishing to address the governing board on any item listed or not listed on the agenda, including items on the consent calendar. You may do so at this time. And so we are prohibited by law from acting on it today, but we can certainly take your public comment. Are there any members here in the room that would like to address the board under public comment? Not seeing any. Do we have any of you online? Please raise your hand on Zoom if you would like to make a public comment.
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised online to comment on this item.
Good, thank you. So with that, we are going to take a break for lunch. So are we adjourning or are we are adjourning the board meeting? So can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, Wes. Your lunch, you could have been eating your lunch, I know.
No, I was waiting till you were
You're
done.
waiting for us? Okay. All those in favor of adjourning? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so we are adjourning the regular governing board meeting at 1:38 p.m. Thank you. I get you back up to the table for just a quick minute, board members. Okay, we'll reconvene here, and I'm going to turn it over to Julie Reagan.
Thank
to
you.
introduce our guest today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope everyone enjoyed their lunch. Julie Reagan, TRPA Director. What we are doing now is actually just convening not an official meeting, but a walking tour that's noticed with the board and our Advisory Planning Commission. And I really wanted to thank the APC and Kevin Drake in particular. We talked quite a bit about getting out in the field more during my interview process and how it's one thing to see things on paper as you review very detailed projects and programs, and reading it from the four walls closed in is one perspective that's important, but there is no substitute for seeing things on the ground. And that is really where this idea came from. And plus it's opportunities for we to connect with their communities, the board members to connect with each other, with our advisory planning commission. And so many members of the APC, our chair Brendan Ferry is here. Give away, Brendan. And if you are a member of the advisory planning commission, will you just raise your hand so the board can see other members? Thank you for being here. And there'll be some remarks about the details of the tour, but that is the idea for this afternoon, and to really see in practice some of the concepts that we talk about on a policy level from behind the dais. And I just have one slide. I'm not sure if Tracy is able to pull it up, and if not, that's okay, because it's something that you should be very familiar with, and it's about complete communities. You heard discussion this morning. We talked about it at great length. There we go. Thank you. In April at our governing board retreat here on the North Shore in Incline Village. And we talked earlier in the active transportation program about complete streets. And what does that mean? It means streets that don't just accommodate cars, but they accommodate pedestrians and bikes and other forms of transportation, and bring in lighting and aesthetics like landscaping and sidewalks. And so we've been marching down that path for quite a long time to make Tahoe have more complete streets, because we were developed as an auto-centric community. And to go back and to retrofit a community that was developed that way is exceedingly difficult and expensive. And we've been working on this for a long time. We're now, thanks to your leadership with the strategic priorities, taking that concept into our communities and integrating better all those elements that deal with pedestrian, bicycle infrastructure and parking, also with affordable workforce housing and stormwater collection and treatment. You know, we were doing green development, and even before there were terms around LEED certification and low impact design, TRPA was a leader in land coverage and open space and water quality measures. And over the course of the decades, that industry has really innovated, and we're trying to catch up our standards now to more modern stormwater collection and treatment, and at the same time, revitalize our communities and provide more housing options. So that's really the underpinning of what we were trying to highlight in this tour. And I can't thank the members of the Planning Commission, our staff, Ryan Murray, who you heard from earlier, coordinated our team, TRPA, and then Placer County has done a lot of heavy lifting to pull this together. And since we are here in Placer County and in Kings Beach, I would love to turn this over to Stephanie Holloway, who's an incredible partner working with our staff and the board to realize really those visions of the regional plan and to get from planning on paper into reality on the ground. So Stephanie, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. Good afternoon, members of the governing board. Stephanie Holloway. I'm a deputy CEO here at Placer County on the North Shore. So as Chair Gustafson opened the meeting this morning, just a big welcome to all of you. To be on the North Shore is really a treat for us. To have you out in our communities, to have boots on the ground, to show you some of the challenges that we're experiencing right now is really an honor for us. So, you know, I do want to recognize a couple of members of our team that are going to help with this tour, provide you more detail and answer your questions. So Crystal Jacobson, our Assistant Deputy CEDRA Director, Rebecca Tabor, I believe is in the room. She is our Deputy in the Public Works Office here in Tahoe Vista. We have a number of other team members, Ryan Decker, who is an engineer with Rebecca's team, and then Heather Beckman, who is a planner. So a lot of conversation, I think, around transportation, housing, you know, communities, really the focus of today. And so, you know, the vitality of our communities, I always say, is like an ecosystem. We talk a lot about ecosystems here in the basin. Our communities are also an ecosystem and the economy around that. I will say, you know, I'll venture to say that our ecosystem in community and vitality is a bit out of balance. And that is really what we want to talk to you about and show you in the Kings Beach area today. So you know, we really haven't seen a lot of change in our communities, although there has been a lot of infrastructure and public improvement dollars that we've put into the communities. Really, I think the basis behind that was to try to elevate the private investment dollar along with that. So we'll highlight that. We'll show you some of those areas. But I do want to just take a minute to talk a little bit about the data. This really, I think, is intended to give you a background
behind the reason why we're seeing the lack of redevelopment in the region. And so I'll start here with just the population data. The dark blue is the overall basin population over the years. The light blue is our portion here in Eastern Placer and in the basin. The green is really our employment. And so you can see both of those metrics, which are key metrics for, our economy and, the viability of our communities, trending downward since the turn of 2000. So next slide. And along with that, to support that, you can see another metric that we look at is school enrollment. So how many people, not only just our population, but what are our viable sort of young families in the region that have kids that are enrolled in our schools. So you can see, from the turn of 2000, we did see a significant dip over the 10 years, and that has climbed back out, but then has become more stable. So again, not a lot of growth there in that portion of the populace. And then again, I just wanted to, this is another piece of population data going back as far as 1970. You can see we had, a sort of a constant trend in growth up to about 2000. And then since then, we have seen a 16% decline in our full-time resident population. Next slide. This is just to talk a little bit about, house prices. We have population decreases, but we also have the increase of housing, upwards of 100% in different areas, almost 200%, in areas within our region. And I think one of the challenges of that, obviously, is just a concept of supply and demand. There's a lot of factors that influence that. But you can see really not a lot of homes being built in that time frame. So increasing costs, but just the overall availability of housing has become a big challenge for us. Next slide. And I think this is a really interesting metric to really compare our income levels to the cost of housing. So you can see here in 2012, the home prices approximately 6 times the household income. You fast forward that 10 years and closer to today, that has almost doubled. So 13 times differential here of what our communities and our employees are making in the region to what they're facing from a housing perspective. Next slide. And then just, some more metrics just around, TOT. So these are certificates in the region for, short-term rentals and other, tourism related stays in the region. That has, increased over the years, but relatively flat over the last couple of years. And part of that was just sort of some tracking increased of sophistication in our tracking mechanisms. But I think on the right here, you can see that the housing occupancy percentages has really trended more towards that seasonal occupancy as opposed to the full-time. So really supporting kind of that downward trend that we're seeing in our population. Those homes aren't changing, but the use of those homes are changing significantly. Next slide. And here, just some more metrics for you. I won't go through this. I know we want to get out in the field, but I'll go to the next slide. I do want to talk a little bit about, sort of the outside influences that are affecting, kind of affect us on a day-to-day basis. You can see here, these are what we call the drive-up communities. Not a lot of growth here. In fact, decline of our population. Those, communities that are within a driving range of us, you can see significant growth. And so, I think we're feeling that. We know that we have a lot of visitors coming from those regions, and I know that that will continue into the future. Vehicle miles travel, I know your board is very familiar with this and something we're continuing to track. Sort of a relation between the growth and the distance between those growing communities and the basin, I think obviously translates into that vehicle miles travel metric. And then the last piece of data I will just talk about, this is vehicle counts. So these are count stations that we have. I'm just presenting you with the North Shore data, but obviously we have count stations in and out of the basin in other areas. But you can see here, not a significant change. In fact, a little bit of a downward trend there if you look at it over that period. Again, here we're counting cars. We're not
necessarily counting how far they travel. That's the VMT metric. I would say that what this data shows you is those vehicles are moving around. They're coming in from different points. They're leaving from different points, but generally the overall count data seems to be consistent. And I think that was my last slide. I believe. Yeah. Okay. So what are you going to see today? I think I just want to mention that, communities, Julie talked about communities. That's really our focus for today. I would say strong, vital communities really thrive on an awareness of the industry. Our industry in this region is tourism, right? And so I think we need to recognize that. And be aware of it. The housing, obviously, one of our biggest barriers, housing translates into people. Those people translate into workers, employees in our region, and then that affects our businesses. When we don't have people in the region, we don't have people to pour coffee or to provide services, and that affects then the visitor experience. You all know this. So I think these are things that we're very aware of here in Placer, what you're going to see in the community. And I think just thinking about, we sometimes we talk about traffic, or we talk about housing, or we talk about redevelopment in silos, but it does really all translate together in our ecosystem for the region and for our communities. So what I will say, and what I kind of highlighted, you'll see older developments, some dilapidated developments today. You'll see public investment dollars on the road and the infrastructure. Our team is working very hard on services as well. So not only infrastructure, but, providing services. We talked a lot about microtransit, the TART Connect program, and other services that we're trying to stand up in the region. So you'll see a little bit of that today, but I'm going to hand this over to Kevin because I know he's got some additional notes, but I just wanted to highlight a handout that I provided all of you. This is something we prepared for the Tahoe Summit, so it was perfect to use for you all today. But there's a lot here. Take it with you. But this is a lot of the initiatives that Placer's working on diligently, and that feeds up to the overall program and the regional mission here with your board and ours as well. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kevin.
Oh, that one. All right. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, governing board members, for being here, and members of the public who are here. It's a special treat to have you here, and we'll walk around Kings Beach. My name is Kevin Drake. I'm a member of the Advisory Planning Commission, the lay representative for Placer County. I'm also a member of North Tahoe Business Association's Economic Vitality Committee. We're focused on economic vitality in the North Shore. I'm a recovering urban and environmental planner who made a pivot to brewing beer, and now I do manufacturing and retail in the Tahoe Basin and employ about 60 people. And I moved to Kings Beach in 2004, short stint in Truckee, moved back and bought a house in 2008, and I love this community. Kings Beach, I'm going to suggest to you, is an ideal planning case study. Kings Beach was laid out in the 1920s. Super compact lots, high density residential area. It butts up against national forests with trails and all the mountain recreation, mountain biking and whatnot. And it flows right into a tight commercial core downtown, which has recently been upgraded and improved. And that flows right into a large state beach that's a huge, amazing draw for tourism and a great asset for locals. So we've got mountain recreation, beach recreation, with this nice compact high density community in between. Kings Beach is still one of the most affordable communities in the area. Honestly, if we were to go back and think about how to design a complete community today, we wouldn't change too many things. Kings Beach is really set up for success. We've got southerly aspect, snow melts pretty quickly. We are the banana belt, except for this winter. We've got a school, we've got a mixed use downtown, we've got a pretty flat topography. So it's really set up for success. I really think Kings Beach should be Lake Tahoe's prime example of a vibrant, walkable beach mountain community and a magnet for tourism. Huge public investment occurred. I think we finished the project about 8 years ago, about $50 million into traffic calming, pedestrian improvements, stormwater improvements, ADA improvements, frontage improvements, all the investment that we thought we needed to revitalize and catalyze investment in Kings Beach, and it hasn't happened. Sales tax revenue has been flat for over a decade. We still have at least 30 vacant buildings and properties in a 1 mile radius. And why is this? I mean, it's complex. There's no simple answer. And obviously there's economic and demographic headwinds, some of which Stephanie was just covering. But I'm going to suggest today that while we have outdated policies that need an overhaul, we need more than policy changes. We actually really need a shift in our mindset to a different style of not just planning, but thinking about implementation that really moves the needle. And when I think about that shift in mindset, there's an organization I've tuned into in the last couple of years called Strong Towns. They've got guiding principles, and there's 6, and it's too long to go into today, but would you hit the next slide? Oh, well, there's our commercial core improvement project from the air, and there's a good example of some of the blight. The Falcon Lodge is an example of a property, I believe, that's been boarded up now for 13 years. Yeah. We won't see it on the tour, but I'm happy to walk anyone by afterwards. Next slide. So Strong Towns has 6 principles for what makes a strong town. I'm just going to go through 3, and I'll send you a follow-up email afterwards with the total 6. The first one is that land is a base resource from which community prosperity is built and sustained. It must not be squandered. We know this in Tahoe. We don't have a lot of land. We have a lot of water, not a lot of land, especially developable land. And at the end of the day, the development activities and the business activities taking place on the land need to pay for themselves. They need to support the services we need to keep that area vital. And so, every block or every project can be thought of as either cash flow positive or cash flow negative. And at the end of the day, a simple way to encourage cash flow positive development is to mandate density and to limit parking. And in general, we've been doing the opposite in Tahoe for a long time. And every time we allow a cash flow negative development style to occur, we're setting ourselves up for failure. We're not going to be able to do the maintenance that's needed to maintain that vitality. We're setting ourselves up for a long-term burden on the balance sheet. Things like, replacing broken lights and snow plowing and sidewalk maintenance and all that stuff. The next principle is job creation and economic growth are the results of a healthy local economy, not substitutes for one. And there's a great analogy I've heard, and I'm going to lean on it. We do a lot of big game hunting, and I think we need to be doing more economic gardening. So we're looking to outside deep pocket project proponents to come into Tahoe to create hotel beds, to create jobs. We have some of those happening, and that's a blessing. I'm going to argue, need to be looking for opportunities to plant seeds, to garden, to grow local businesses. I mean, what if we really focused staff resources on cultivating the growth of successful small businesses in Tahoe that can grow and create jobs? What would need to change? And I would argue the number one thing that needs to change is just more boots on the ground and personal engagement from staff in the communities, not just Kings Beach, but all of our communities. And the last principle is that local government is a platform for citizens to collaboratively build a prosperous place. Sounds good, and in spirit, that's in what we're intending to do. But I think what it calls out is we need small scale bottom up actions more than we need top down systems, which is the way we've been planning for forever. And what I mean by bottom up actions are incremental projects, small bets with a high ROI and a minimal risk of unintended consequences. There are tons of opportunities right in front of us to take small actions that can move the needle, provide a case in point, maybe alleviate some public concern, and then we can scale the successes and we can learn from the failures without catastrophic failures. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Ryan. We're going to walk Kings Beach, and you're going to see it from the vantage point of a pedestrian, which I know is a whole lot different than driving through in your car. And I hope you'll keep some of these principles in mind when we walk on the tour and talk about some of the successes and the challenges we have today that are very real. So, Ryan, it's yours.
And while Ryan gets ready to orient us, I will just a little housekeeping. For those folks who need to leave some belongings behind while we go out, if you didn't have a chance to get out to your car, just at the top of the steps, there's a conference room on the right. You could lock your bags, your purse, your laptops, whatever. So just come in at the end of the tour, and just the staff here at the facility will open the door. And so I will say, great set up for this tour. These principles and these concepts have really come up a lot in my conversations with the community. And to Stephanie's point, there is a disconnect. There is a feeling of overwhelm that isn't squaring with a declining population base. It's not a feeling of less traffic. There's a feeling of more traffic, and there are reasons for that. And the patterns are shifting, and it's creating this dissonance that I hope that these kinds of opportunities will allow us to get to the bottom of and continue to work through. So with that, I will hand it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Julie. Stephanie, Kevin, I really appreciate you guys kicking us off and sort of centering that focus around what's about to happen here in the field. So as Julie said, get your belongings in order, stash them where you need to, grab a sip of water if you need it. In about 5 minutes, we're going to meet in the parking lot of the event center out here. Give you a quick overview. Tracy, I don't know if you have the map on a slide, but if not, we're going to start out of the parking lot and head on the lake side of the street towards Raccoon and 28, and kind of our first stop is going to be at that roundabout there. So yeah, get your belongings in order, and we'll meet everybody in the parking lot.